Internet Explorer. By user number 0011. Disowned by his family and banished from the magical institution, Kaniel had been exiled to rule over the forsaken northernmost borderlands. There, the populace suffered from waves of monsters and famine. None trusted the bastard noble. Nor would Kaniel himself if not for the opportunity granted by an aloof deity. A mysterious web of infinite archives from a faraway realm known as Earth. The Internet. Through this, he could now access knowledge once reserved by imperial decree. Influence minds with modern education and command them through social engineering. Innovate the banking system to fuel economies. Initiate the Industrial Revolution. A new, fascinating path. A hope. To protect, not destroy, perhaps. Yet in this darkness and its fantasies, one thing remained clear in his mind. There's always a price to pay, even for something free. Especially for something free. But did that hold for someone who had lost everything but his life? Coming soon. Darkness so pure, not a single ray of light could find its way to him. He was enamored by cruel, black despair. Worry not, my son. All will fall back into place. Everything will be fine. Every nerve drove a searing stake through his mind. Each vein split in lightning. Promise me one thing, Kaniel. You shall never, never lose your heart and be led astray. Tears melted with blood and seeped onto the cold basement floor. The boy lay splayed across it. He barely raised his head and took one final look at his Lena. Kaniel woke to angelic choirs and caught sight of a devil incarnate in the form of a young lady sitting opposite him, playing a melody on her flute, eyes closed, dismissive of his glare, the trickles of glassy tears letting down. Sways of her lustrous blonde hair against the light tumbles of the carriage layered on her frail shoulders, streaming down her white, priestly robe onto her lap. Bored was the shepherd boy watching the skies. Believed the people in his lies once or twice. Bereft of the trust brought forth his demise. Would you still your foul mouth, Irina? He implored, running a hand through his messy, raven-black hair to clear away the memories and the headache that came hand in hand. He then clasped his chest to calm his ailing heart. Go fuck yourself, said the delicate lady to the noble, and just when she was about to return to her musings, frowned. Was it a nightmare again? You poor lamb. Kaniel shut his mouth before he could ignite yet another petty feud. He tilted his head to his side, resting his chin on his palm, watching through the open carriage window, his murky eyes of the darkest dark scrutinizing the forest. Who broke our Connie's heart? Who would do such stupidity? The trees held to haggard slopes, drowning the fields in pine needles that lay atop a carpet of leaves. Shards of milky stone flowered around the roots, wounded by time itself. Buzzing insects, tiny and huge, cute or deadly and mayhaps both, wound through the herbs of every shade. Ignoring me? Haha. I see. Are you feeling better? Cool and mysterious. He glanced forward at the brightest clearing beyond the front wooden carriages and mules and saw a bright garden where flat roses, high and low, almost frighteningly alive on bright crimson stems, lay, in hundreds. The green bushes beside bowed at their beauty. Amidst the shrubs stood a gargantuan evergreen, proud and solitary, lifting the fruits and appending the leaves in simple, silent splendor. And there, he saw the first piles of snow during what was considered the warmest time of the year back in the capital, at the end of July. We're close, he said, perhaps around this time. We'll arrive at the northern borders, she finished for him. I only have a few hours to live, so to speak, Irina added as a brittle laugh broke from her lips. Huh. What then? Eternal darkness? Hell? Hell, maybe there is such a thing as the reincarnation pagans speak of. Huh, Connie, which one do you think it is? Kaniel breathed deeply. In. Out. The air was fresh. The weather was ideal. Beats me, he replied, leaning back as his seat screeched. You know, he said, crossing his arms and tapping his left fingers against his sleeve, you never struck me as a faithful one, Miss Saintess. I've heard that the training is harsh and rigorous. Why even bother? Humph. Masterful at switching topics, I see, she said, sniffling. Typical of a noble, human garbage. So, he pressed. Guess, she snapped back. Silence permeated the passenger compartment until the transport clattered over a loose stone. Losing her patience, Irina gave in. She shot her eyes open and pointed to them with her thin fingers. Wanna heal these, is all. She gazed at Kaniel with those cloudy pools, the blues barely perceptible. Cure blindness, huh, he huffed. What grand goals. Why, it would have been possible if I'd become one of the saintesses and sought help from the Pope. Fuck, with enough attainment in divinity, I could have done it myself, she said, wiping away her tears with the hem of her threadbare robe. Besides, you shouldn't be the one to talk, oh lustful demon, she teased with a wry smirk. Still, unfair, don't you think? I strangle some lesser noble and get sentenced to death. You, on the other hand, lay your hands on the princess herself, and barely get demoted to a wasteland. Perhaps my greatest sin was being born a commoner. Kaniel didn't refute her. Blankly, he just stared at her, expressionless. Kidding, she said, waving her hands. Rumors may be deceptive, eh? A dense person such as yourself would never. What a joke, a sham, a farce. Framed, were you not? As deceptive as beauty, he remarked. What do you mean? Kaniel locked eyes with hers. You think our little adventure is a coincidence? This time, Irina adhered to silence. Kaniel resumed, leaning further back, eyes piercing beyond the roof headliner to too high above. Rescuing you would mend a perfect excuse for my brother to send me to the gallows or, worse, the wasteland beyond the border where monsters thrive, and completely dispose of me. Irina hunched forward. I see, she spoke shakily, playing with her ridiculously lengthy hair strands. You nobles are excessively vile, plotting to purge your own blood, even. Oh, it's way worse, he said with a shrug, only halfway realizing she couldn't see him. Never mind that. The least I can do is warn you. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, for the first time in your life, you're about to glimpse the bottomless pit of malice within the human heart. Irina tilted her head. Eh? What kind of nonsense? Creepy. Kaniel reclined. You've become useless to my brother, for I'm not saving you. The band of knights will abduct you in a nearby area devoid of monsters. Abduct? Yeah. You're weirdly perceptive for a blind person, so you should have noticed the commander's gaze plastered on you these past 2 weeks. He donned his thick coat trimmed with golden linings, rummaged in one of its deep pockets, and pulled out a handkerchief with an awkward, childish stitching of a dove, extending it to her. The carriage began to slow its pace, the clopping of the mule's hooves more distinct, the wheels grinding against the gravel of the snowy path. The journey's end felt within the cabin. Shadows drew out as the compartment rolled forward. Adjusting to the change in momentum, Kaniel held on to the handrail. Irina, though, fell to her knees, too frozen to process his words. She proceeded to snatch the handkerchief and blew her nose on it nonetheless. Kaniel simply watched, unperturbed. Irina, even if we cannot choose the terms on which we are born, or whether to be born at all, we can still seek our own end, he stated matter-of-factly. All the movements came to a complete and sudden halt. The nobleman shifted his gaze toward the door on his left in anticipation of the footsteps that soon followed. So, being devoured by monsters, insatiable human greed, or you yourself? Having lived a life dictated by fate or mischief? He handed her a narrow-bladed dagger. Whichever it is, don't look back crying. Don't waste it on regret. Irina flung out her hands and took the thin dagger, then froze, gasping, pale, perplexed. You mean, her eyes welled with tears as she stared at his boots. Kaniel sat silently, waiting for the doors. And when they opened, he stood. The cold summer breeze infringed upon the cabin. Beyond the guardian knights and the crowds of starving populace awaiting the rise of a new tyrant, further along the muddy paths and stunted shrubs among rocky outcroppings, lay a settlement, a fortified village of sorts, centered around a ramshackle castle meant to serve as the baronial seat. Your estate awaits, Sir Nashdome, said the commander knight, a slight tone of ridicule slipping into his otherwise professional call. The gray-bearded veteran looked past Kaniel's shoulder at the frail woman slumped on the floor. He licked his lips, savoring the sight of her exposed neck, relishing her hopelessness. Farewell, Rena, Kaniel said as he walked away. You are not, Irina raised her voice. You are not a bad person, Connie. You are not a bad child, my son. Where had that come from? He paused midway down the staircase, one hand resting on the brass rail, and glanced back. Not a good one either, you bastard, she muttered. Kaniel turned his head forward and gazed at the commoners from on high. The nasty looks they threw back could drown one. He continued descending, his steps creaking the wood beneath him, on the verge of cracking, breaking, falling apart, crumbling. Down. Target identified. Initializing integration to Earth. Registering user #0003. Tumbling down. How should I refer to you? Asked Kaniel. Gora will do, said the pallid man. The two, surrounded by stony timber-framed houses, trod the narrow streets alongside each other. Kaniel shifted his gaze to his left and glanced up at the scarecrow of a man. His own exceptional height barely reached the man's shoulders. Even more peculiar was his massive forehead. I meant your occupation. Ah, the man exclaimed apathetically. Steward, butler, marshal, so on. His narrow eyes fixated on the path ahead, tired yet focused, aloof yet terrifying, not a tinge of emotion perceptible in them. He tilted his disheveled chin and took a momentary look at the new lord, scrutinizing him from head to toe with those dead fish eyes of his, the color slightly lighter than the voluminous, disarrayed hair. Black strands, in this, and perhaps only in this regard, the man was just like anybody else in the settlement. Gora will do, Gora said. Gora it is, Kaniel resigned. He looked back at the populace that followed behind, all slim and lanky, with black hair, pale skin, lively dark eyes. Back in the capital, he was often compared to the northerners, which was considered an insult. The words northerner and barbarian were used interchangeably. Kaniel would disagree. To him, they gave the impression of grim reapers, if anything. The current sight only served to anchor his views. So, Gora. Yes? Such fierce eyes, those peasants. As though they want to tear me apart with them. Yes. His curt replies didn't stun Kaniel. Neither did the aggravated peasants. Unlike in the Elven and Dwarven empires, not many common folk were enthusiastic about nobles in the human empire in the first place, especially if it was a noble with such atrocious accusations as Kaniel's. The rare instances when they wholeheartedly revered their lords could be counted on one hand. First impressions matter, Gora noted, his steps leaving colossal footprints on the dried snow. You didn't even say a word. No greetings upon arrival. Just nodded. Forgive me for my insolence, my lord, but what did you expect? By this, Kaniel was internally taken aback. Not because of the apparent revelation, of course, but the talkativeness. Gora had given him an impression of a man of a few words. That impression shattered and vanished into thin air, his breath condensing into short-lived vapors. He clenched his fists, his pace slowing. I can't with this anymore, Kaniel muttered gibberish under his breath as his steps came to a sudden halt. His lips twitched. How dare those lowlifes glare at me, he snapped, his calm expression contorting into one full of gnash and fury. He pointed at the people, his bloodshot eyes reddened with veins, spitting every word. Do you people in the north not even understand how to treat nobles? Huh. You should all have watery eyes filled to the brim with gratitude upon the presents bestowed by my graceful self. And yet. You mongrels dare oppose someone of such high esteem. He strode in their direction and pointed a finger at them, the hand shaking, the other clenched into a fist. No amount of light can guide those who refuse to open their eyes. No guide can lead the blind who wish to remain lost, as those who cling to blindness will never glimpse the horizon. Or so he said. Deep down, he was impressed, very. Were it people back in the capital, they would cower and tremble before any noble, no matter how lowly or cruel, but the individuals who stood before him neither faltered nor backed down. Either the influence of nobles and the authority they held wasn't as far-reaching as he thought, or monster waves and conditions had hardened people here so much that they simply couldn't care. Possibly both. Now, impressed he was, of course. Still, that was where it ended. In their eyes, he saw hate, fury, scorn. It didn't matter. He had seen it everywhere anywhere before. What he didn't like was the scourge of defiance as it and only it had the strength to break the yoke, for only in it lay the seed of rebellion. Anger and resentment could boil in the masses, but without the will to defy, they were powerless. So he waited. He waited for someone brave to stand to shatter the chains, to try to set an example. He needed more than anger, a spark, an inspirational figure. Yet none did. His eyes landed on a lone little boy in the corner, his lips forming into an ugly leer. Brat. His voice rose. Come closer. The boy looked at him in bewilderment and then right and left at the adults and his peers. None responded to his pleas. Again, he ran a hand through his spiky hair and stranded his eyes everywhere he could. No answers came. Do you not hear me? Without any other option and the Lord's patience visibly running thin, he jogged and stood right before him, ready for a beating, eyes shut tight. Instead, he felt a soft touch on his head. A palm. He was being patted. He slowly opened them, his eyes astounded. Poor child. A moment ago, Pana felt dread, yet now, he was relieved and relished in spirited joy. He hadn't since the passing of his parents. Your filthy parents didn't teach you manners, did they? All the spectators gasped. The word slowly but surely dawned on the child. His small, oval face became aghast. Tears followed, silent yet telling. His lips quivered. His mouth widened, breaths rapid. It's okay, kid. It's the people who should be blamed. Kaniel's expression softened. A child's path is often laid by their parents, who sow manners in their children. The roots grow deep, and their fruits will be borne by the next generation and the one after that, who carry the harvest. Pana began to sob loudly, uncontrollably. Glassy tears trickled down his puffy cheeks onto his tattered, off-white shirt. Kaniel brushed them away. Worry not. Though the roots may be tangled, it's never too late to nurture new growth, as even a troubled past can be the soil from which a better future is cultivated, and a new harvest can still be grown. The mistakes of the parents don't have to be your fate. There's always a chance to tear apart the perpetual cycle. Enough. A scream erupted from the crowd of bystanders. Did you have enough fun on your power trip? The crowd parted. All the gazes landed on a figure of a young man who stepped forth, some worried, some bewildered, all supportive. Kaniel, too, glimpsed at him once again with sly amusement. Outwardly, though, he remained frustrated, shocked. Sensing the tension, Pana ran away. You nobles are cut from the same cloth. No better than animals. No, worse than animals. But even for a noble, you seem to have a pretty sharp tongue, don't ya? He pointed his blade at Kaniel. My parents told me men used steel to clear the air, you know. He glared at Kaniel with a brave smirk. His dark hair fell past his narrow eyes, a few pieces brushing against his angular face. Handsome was the bastard. Kaniel could swear that if the man took better care of himself, he'd look no second to the crown prince who so much cared about appearances. A perfect counterfeit indeed. Brazen brat, who are you? Kaniel spat. Me? The man strode till he stood a few steps away from Kaniel and crossed his arms. I, Leonard Smith, demand a duel. Let us see if your blade is as sharp as your wit. Silence fell. Though expected, even Kaniel was taken aback. The man was truly fearless. Do you realize the weight of your words? He probed. That even if you were to defeat me, claim my noblehood, and keep yourself alive, you'd have to fight one of the top 100 swordsmen the Empire sends after you. Leonard frowned. Well, of course, he hadn't. Of course I did. So be it. Kaniel stepped forward, reaching for the blade at his waist. I shall show the mongrels their true place. His lips curled into a ridiculous grin. Leonard planted his feet in a wide stance, knees slightly bent. He raised and angled his sword diagonally, high, with the hilt positioned near the side of his head above eye level. Though tense, his arms were ready to strike, block, or parry, waiting for movement. Then, just as Kaniel's fingers brushed the pommel, Gora's massive hand landed on his shoulder. Kaniel shot his eyes at the taller man, his teeth grinding. Remove your hand unless you're prepared to lose it. Apologies, my lord, he said, dipping his head with humility. Would you please do me a favor and forgive this scoundrel? Kaniel's eyes narrowed to slits. Gora followed. I ask that you leave this matter to me. Count your lucky stars, brat. Kaniel relaxed his hand and turned toward the castle. Today is a good day. A sunny day. No blood will be shed. The crowd gasped in relief. They were ever so thankful for Gora's presence. All except one. Where are you going, you coward? Lower your blade. Gora stood before him like a mountain. He hunched over, hands inside his pockets, staring Leonard down. I'm sorry, Gorayo. Don't stop me. We too have honor and pride, you know? He pushed past him to follow the lord. Suddenly, a shoe connected with Leonard's jaw, his head snapping back with a crack. His body spun midair repeatedly before crashing to the ground across the snowy street. So did his sword, clattering beside him as his arms went limp, his consciousness ripped from him before he could comprehend. Before anybody could fully comprehend. Gora lowered his leg and glanced at the crumpled boy at his feet with indifference. "Take him to the priestess," he said flatly. Installing basic English package. Installing basic user manual. A monotone voice as flat as winter stone resounded in Kaniel's head. The lord and his steward neared the castle grounds. Their feet crunched the dead leaves blown by hollow winds. The iron gates thundered as they swung open under the weight of years of rust. As old as the mossed path before them. Flowers, primarily blue, invaded both the ground and the air with their colors and even more so colorful scents. The now bare walls loomed with pikes where banners had once hung. "I reckon Nashdome was once a military quarter," Kaniel wondered aloud. "Not just," Gora said, removing his hand from the door. 30 years ago, it was the military center of the north. The area thrived despite the constant battles. Now, only the battles remain. What happened to the previous lord they had sent from the capital? Kaniel asked as he moved forward, looking around. It was clear that someone had poured their heart into the garden long ago. But now, that love was buried under the bushes of thorny brambles as the smell of wood rot dragged from the dark archways. Neglect. A few bushes bore signs of pruning, the cuts so uneven whoever tended the garden had given up halfway through, overwhelmed by the sheer scale. "He made a contract with a demon to improve his health," Gora said, hands clasped loosely behind the back. "Didn't work out." The hedges lining the path had grown wild, no longer trimmed. Some roses bloomed along the garden beds with petals so broad they lay flush against the earth, thorny and rusty. Frost persisted despite summer. "My lord, what were you trying to accomplish with that?" "What do you mean?" Kaniel scowled, glaring at Gora. But it seemed Gora had seen through his bullshit. He sighed. "To set an example." "Lies," Gora said with a low voice. "I've received a report from the capital in preparation for your arrival. You possess no mana and have no mastery of either aura or elementals. Forgive me, my lord, but how were you supposed to set an example with such a body? You knew I'd step up, didn't you? You speak in riddles. At times rude, at others relenting. Just like how nobles speak." Kaniel's expression softened. "Why did I instigate hate, you ask? What do you think?" "I wouldn't ask if I knew." The clearer side of the castle rose. Once the crux of the military power, the monolith still had the menace it had wielded in its prime. Not a place built to impress visiting nobles or house lavish banquets, the castle had been constructed for survival at war, its walls thick, blocky, and without unnecessary decor, besmeared by years of storms, designed solely to repel sieges and endure whatever was thrown at it. Fascinating. Kaniel tilted his head to the side, bemused. The architecture. This castle will hold for 100 more years. They walked in silence. Insects such as hoverflies and beetles whizzed on without any care and purpose, coming from nowhere, hidden everywhere. "If you're this interested, fine. I want to make him into a noble." Kaniel gave in. "My eyes are good at picking people. He seemed like he'd do a better job, no?" Gora straightened his posture and glanced at Kaniel, trying to figure out what kind of demon this man had made a contract with. Some merchants with the city's worth of fortune are willing to give it all up to become a noble. What prompted you for such drastic actions? "I want to live in peace." He tapped a finger against his chin. "What's the difference between being a noble and a commoner if you cannot enjoy life? I may act like a moron, but I refuse to live the life of one." Gora couldn't help but think that it was too late. That the demon had already taken over the lord's body. Why else would he spew such nonsense? Is that the best excuse you can muster? Rude he was. But Gora couldn't stand those blatant lies for longer. He was a human, just like any other, and had a reservoir of patience that was running thinner and thinner as his time went by talking to this madman. "You said that the previous lord practiced dark arts, correct?" Kaniel changed the topic shamelessly. "That means he had some chamber of sorts where he had done the experiments." "Good. I found a place to set up my alchemical grounds." Gora clenched his hands tight. The new lord was even more insufferable than the last one. "I'll be watching you." He gave him an empty stare. Kaniel's gaze was still plastered on the wondrous castle. Narrow arrow slits presided over the upper levels to give defenders cover while raining arrows down on attackers. Most openings were boarded shut now, others stuffed with rags to keep the cold winds out. Crenellations of the remnants of old battlements were chipped, a few sections having collapsed, even. The watchtowers had their parapets slanted, the windows set into these towers narrow, their glass panes long gone, replaced by wooden planks. Kaniel noted the murder holes carved into the ceiling of the archway they passed through which scalding oil and boiling water would have been poured on invaders. Now, the holes were clogged with dirt and bird nests. Finally, they arrived at the entrance. At its top was an engraving of the symbol of the Nashdome barony, a beautiful northern black warhorse, eroded by frost yet proud still, its eyes fierce and legs stretched forward and back. Gora opened the door and gestured for Kaniel to step in. Yet, the lord stood frozen, still gazing at the coat of arms, the horse. His eyes were darker than his hair, the horse, or even a starless night sky. Darker than they usually were and the darkest he had ever seen. Gora looked at where the lord did. Beneath the horse were damaged letters. A slogan. Did it trigger some memories? He seemed to mutter something under his breath. My lord? Hearing his voice, Kaniel finally awakened from his reverie. He clasped his hand tight against his heart, biting his lips. The dark lusters in his eyes were no more. I'm pretty tired from the 2-week journey to the north. He smiled at him, weakly. Gora nodded in acknowledgement. Too many secrets to uncover, but he'd probe another time. It was true that the lord had gone through a strenuous journey, after all. He could sympathize. Kaniel stepped across the threshold first. Gora followed without a word. As the great door creaked shut behind them, the noise of insects faded into oblivion. High above, wooden beams sagged. What few torches remained in their brackets along the walls were cold and blackened, untouched by fire for months, if not years. Dust, wood rot, and old smoke pervaded their nostrils. The only sound was of their faint steps, each one a drop into a still pool. The hallway was lined with pillars that reached a ceiling lost in shadow. Old banners drooped from iron rods fixed to the walls, what symbols they had once borne long since lost to decay, the threads unraveling. Kaniel wandered his gaze along the walls as they moved forward, his fingers trailing over the straight lines carved into the walls, marks where weapons racks might have stood, and hooks for armor long removed. They reached the first intersection in the hallway, wherein a narrow staircase spiraled upward. There, 4 maids stood, waiting on a red carpet. Each wore a simple black uniform, worn yet orderly, freshly pressed despite their frayed edges, with white aprons and collars that looked hastily washed as if pressed into service on short notice. They bowed gently. 2 to the left and 2 to the right. We welcome the lord, said the head maid standing at the right. Despite her age, she looked young, her white hair braided close to the scalp and gathered under a white cap. Kaniel immediately looked at the maid who stood next to her. To her large and round, hollow and half-lidden, red eyes. Those eyes didn't belong to a human. Undoubtedly a mutant. The girl didn't sway from his stare. She stood as she stood, unmoving, unblinking, detached. Her black hair draped around her like a curtain and spilled past her shoulders, down her back in unruly waves. The strands near the ends tinged with a dark crimson as though soaked in blood. She held a faint pout to her lips. Not as though she was about to complain, but had already given up on the thought in its entirety. Standing in line beside the headmaid seemed to be just another exhausting chore. Why is a vampire lost here? Kaniel asked, locking eyes with Gora. She's Lumen, someone on the left voiced their dissatisfaction before Gora could respond. Kaniel shifted his gaze and watched the twins who stood to his left. One pierced him with her dark brown eyes, while the other glared at her sister. Perhaps only in North one could find a maid who'd speak back to their noble. Very well, he whispered, pressing his thumb against his brow. I just want to rest. Then we'll talk on how to fix this mess. Seriously, only for 4 people to look after an entire castle? No wonder. I'll take you to your quarters, Lord. The same maid raised her hand energetically. Once again, Kaniel swept a gaze through the twins. The only 2 physical differences between the bold and timid one were that the latter wore glasses and had her hair braided tightly over one shoulder. Otherwise they were identical. Same round faces. The same couldn't be said about their personalities, whereas one beamed with energy, the other was a borderline vampire. Right, there was a damn literal vampire to his right. Wait. Don't tell me, he pointed a finger at Lumen. She isn't the demon you were talking about, is she? He asked Gora. Gora shrugged. Yes. All the maids tensed up, almost, except the suspect herself, who was as indifferent as ever. Let's get out of here. Kaniel smiled at the maid. The twin. The cheerful one. She, too, hated awkward situations, as such, quickly led Kaniel toward the staircases. We've prepared a good meal, milord, the headmaid proposed. Later. Kaniel shook his head as he waved his hand and left. They slowly trod the stairways. The young maid glanced back at Kaniel every so often, gauging his mood. Kaniel followed in quiet strides. What's your name? He asked. Zara, she said. Lord Kaniel, right? Indeed. Though you don't seem to care about the lord part. Humph, she sked. Uncle Gora told us about you before you arrived in North. A terrible, terrible womanizer. Her loose bangs fell over one eye. And what's wrong with being a vampire, huh? Kaniel dismissed her accusations. Instead, he formed a crooked smile. Aren't you scared, then, leading me into my quarters, cutie? He tried to imitate Irina. Zara's body shook in disgust. Kaniel trailed one hand along the rough stone wall as they ascended. It grew narrower as they climbed, the torches fewer and farther between, the air colder. When they reached the top of the staircase, she stopped abruptly and turned to face him, her hands clasped in front of her. Almost there, she said with a smile. Your room overlooks the northern forest. Not much, but peaceful. As peaceful as things get around here. They stopped at the end of the hallway. Your room, she announced with a flourish, pushing open the large wooden door. The fire in the hearth had already been lit, showering the large room in light across the walls. At the center stood a large bed draped in blankets, opposite to it a wooden writing desk near the window, and finally, a narrow balcony overlooking the forest beyond at the very end of the room. He shrugged off his coat, tossing it onto the bed, and crossed the room to the window, then stood there, in silence, watching the wind carry itself. I'll be off then, unless you need something from me, she said cheerfully. I do. Listen. The forest was vast, endless, crowded. Yet, it felt lonely. You need not worry. I won't touch Lumen or your sister. The sun shone. Yet, it felt cold. You neither. You're too ugly, Zara. The door shut with an explosive force. Kaniel looked back. Finally, he was alone. System, he whispered. A blue hologram formed before him. 98.3%. 98.4%. 98.5%. The pain in his heart intensified. Would this be an end? A new beginning? A continuation of past sufferings? 98.6%. Or perhaps, the beginning of the end. Kaniel neared his bed and sat on it in a lotus position, resting his hands on his knees, breath slow. Painful. Agonizingly painful. The semi-transparent screen floated before him. 98.7%. Nails dug into the flesh of his palms. The heart hammered to burst outward. His eyes burned brighter than his lungs, and darker than the abyss all the same. 98.8%. But it was nothing. In comparison to everything he'd gone through, such pain was but a joke. And even greater pain beheld still. According to Emperor Constantine, the founder of the empire who had freed humanity from the enslavement of other races, the true hardships only came after 99%. 98.9%. Yet even all these hardships seemed insignificant, considering the rewards. He had to persist. For if he could, he would obtain Emperor Constantine's inheritance. A treasure so invaluable it would most certainly lead to a war between the four empires. He just had to. 99%. Blood began to pour from every opening in his body, rivers from his nose, pools from his mouth, oozes from his ears. In a short while, his white shirt was stained full red. Blood was the first deadly agony. The spilling of blood could be seen as intrinsic to life's struggle for survival and represents the predation cycle where life feeds upon life to survive. As such, the first sin is the inherent necessity of bloodshed, not a human construct, but a fundamental part of existence itself. Every being, whether knowingly or not, commits violence to sustain itself. Memories coursed through his mind, one by one, from every sin he'd committed to every sin committed against him. The downward spiral had begun from the very moment he'd taken his sister's life in his mother's womb. Blood continued to flow fervently, seemingly endlessly. A few minutes passed by. Yet Kaniel remained stoic. He had long stopped caring about his past and couldn't care less for the future. Present mattered only. If he died, so be it. No amount of pain could kill him, both inner and outer. He shook, sweated, and bit his lips, and yet, his expression was unmoved. 99.1%. Kaniel saw a literal devil stand in front of him. It laughed at him ridiculously and pointed a sharp finger at his neck. It looked horrific. Too tall. Too wide. Rotten meat, shambled bones, cutthroat veins. Its distorted body barely held together. Fear was the second deadly agony. Someone who fears failure may never pursue their ambitions and choose to remain in mediocrity rather than risk the sting of rejection. Someone who once longed for greatness may shrivel into apathy and convince themselves that nothing is worth the risk. Someone who feared pursuing their passion may look back and wonder what might have been. Someone afraid of loss may withdraw from relationships to avoid the pain of separation and only end up lonelier than they ever feared. Fear forces them to experience the worst possible outcomes before they even happen. A death without the finality of it. Fear keeps a person trapped in an unending limbo between desire and paralysis. So, when the spirit of an archdemon looked at the mortal and tried to devour his soul, it was assured that the mortal before him would easily succumb. After all, even if one didn't fear pain, all feared death. Yet the devil saw a devil in him. Kaniel locked eyes with the figure. He grinned, crazily. How could a puny mortal not fear him? With those thoughts, the being slowly returned to the astral plane. 99.2%. Kaniel began to lose his sight. The pain in his eyes amplified to an unbearable extent. He blinked repeatedly, only setting it on more fire. Burning was the greatest and most grievous torture humanity had ever come up with. Simple yet effective in its purpose. At that moment, Kaniel felt not only his body burn but his mind too. His thoughts got jumbled up. Kill. 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 Thousands of voices spoke over each other the same exact words. Those were vengeful souls of the deceased from the soul realm. Let go. Let go of everything. They all attempted to take over his body amidst the excruciating pain. Wrath was the third deadly agony. By eroding empathy, kindness, and compassion, replacing them with bitterness and hatred, over time, wrath makes one see everything and everyone as enemies, depriving them of any form of peace or joy, leaving them empty and directionless, their only purpose to sustain the ever-growing rage. Thus wrath burns everything in its path, including the soul that carries it. Kaniel's lips shook. Yet his grin deepened. Tears flowed down his cheeks. Yet they weren't his. He slowly but thoroughly destroyed the foreign souls, trying to take over his body with pure will. They would see no more afterlife. Once a soul descends into the physical world, its only end would be destruction. After wrath came lust, then greed, then envy, then pride, then gluttony, accordingly. 99.8%. Breaths didn't feel like breaths. They just felt like another moment he had to live. Life was such a crude and rudimentary, fragile thing. Why did he live? Why did he even bother? Wouldn't all the suffering end at once he gave up on his worthless pursuit? Darkness. Feelings were none. There was no path, no direction, no destination. Complete nihility. He forgot. Forgot why he had to persist. Himself. Everything. Kaniel lost his sight. He was trapped in an endless black void for what felt like an eternity. Preserving his cognition while persevering through the sea of nothingness was the greatest hurdle in his life. The allure of sleep had never been so sweet. The passage of time was unforgiving, and as the count of time had long been lost, at times, it only appeared to be but a fleeting moment. Though it had been an eternity, hadn't it? Sloth was the ninth deadly agony. People are creatures inherently driven by aspirations. Without any intelligent purpose beyond instincts, a being becomes a slave driven by those very instincts, an animal. Emotions collapse into numbness. Thoughts fade into nothingness. The longer one stays in this paralysis, the more one sinks. Eventually, the soul becomes a hollow shell, stripped of any will to engage with the world or oneself. A bland, blunt blank. There was no spark of hope, fear, or even wrath. Numbing agony. Oblivion. The black liquid flowed from his eyes. Kaniel couldn't see it. He could only feel the scorching of the dark flame scatter on his cheeks. Then came the deadliest agony. 99.9%. Curiosity. Suddenly, Kaniel could see once again. Yet, he saw everything and nothing. The things that were not meant to be seen. The king in yellow, who presided over the corners of the universe, and conversely, the demon sultan, who lay in sleep at its very center. He saw the beings of the void. Many. And although mirages and mere reflections of them, he was driven completely mad, on the brink of the precipice. His mind barely held together, on the verge of destruction. Those consumed by curiosity sacrifice anything. Relationships, sanity, safety. All for the sake of discovery. The seeker spirals deeper into obsession. Blind to their destruction, they keep digging deeper, 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 and deeper, ignoring all warnings, because they cannot stop. They jump even when they see the edge of the abyss. What's on the other side? Yet, once they're on the other side, they still keep wondering what's on the other side. Questions generate more questions. The pursuit of knowledge breaks down the boundaries of sanity. No matter how hard Kaniel tried to hold, his consciousness started to give way. The last vision. He saw a large megapolis. Mages flew in the orange air, in crowds. Demons and humans coexisted in peace, happily going about their everyday lives. It was out of fantasy. There were golden houses, buildings the size of mountains, and many flying islands. At the very center of the city stood a building grander than any other. Within lived the most prestigious and privileged individuals of society. Deeper, at its basement, there was Tartarus, a place where most heinous criminals were kept. Even deeper yet, there was a mystical domain. Therein, a small pond lay. At its center, a human figure. Kaniel couldn't make out their face clouded in a nameless mist. Something within him said he was looking at neither a mortal nor an immortal. A god neither good nor evil. A being whom no words or concepts could describe. It was fear that told him. Terror. Kaniel's thoughts crumbled. His breath ceased. Then, he started hyperventilating, dark tears falling ceaselessly. "We meet again," the being said with a calm, gentle voice. Kaniel could feel the gaze plastered on himself from across the universe. 100%. Initialization complete. He lost his consciousness. When Kaniel regained consciousness, he was inside a small room, surrounded by bright whiteness on all sides. He lay on the floor for a long while. Strangely enough, he didn't carry any physical injuries, nonetheless, mentally, he was crippled, to put it the best way. The worst was, the more he thought, the worse it got. "How am I alive?" he asked, expecting no one to answer. A transparent blue box formed before his eyes. The engravings followed. Level, 0. Points, 0. Skills, not applicable. Initialization was over, yet, he didn't feel relieved in the least. Instead, he was bamboozled. Kaniel had gone to such lengths to obtain the system. He finally did, and due to the pre-installed manual, he could immediately understand what the attributes scribed on the blue hologram meant. The problem was in the numbers, or more precisely, the lack thereof. Level 0 meant he was a weakling. 0 points meant he was broke. No skills whatsoever was a nail in the coffin. To sum it up, all the system did to him was tell him he was useless. Records said that Emperor Constantine could stand against a massive army by himself, all with the help of the system. Something didn't add up. Did he perhaps leave a prank instead of an inheritance? "Motherfucker," Kaniel whispered in English in an accent so broken that the emperor himself would roll in his grave. He pressed his fingers against his brows and calmed himself down. Not all was lost. Yet. He rose to his feet and darted his eyes across the room. At the front stood a table upon legs not of wood but of some unknown black material, unlike any he had ever seen, bizarrely plain, without carvings or a single blemish. Devoid of nails or pegs holding it together, it still stood firm as castle walls. Beside was a chair with no velvet or silk. And atop the desk a strange machinery, a box of glass and metal. A computer? Kaniel muttered, frowning at the headache that followed. The information swarmed his mind all at once, and as such, he couldn't turn it into something comprehensive. He instinctively neared, sat on the chair, then pressed the circular emblem on the side. The computer awakened from its slumber. Tiny blue LEDs along the edges blinked to life. Mechanical click-clacks followed while the machinery activated. The screen burst the room with pale blue lights. To his amazement, Kaniel knew what was occurring. How the CPU fetched instructions into RAM from the BIOS stored in the ROM. Lines of code ran vertically, thousands of symbols flashing a second before vanishing into the background as the system loaded. Configuration complete. Choose a username. The lifeless machine asked for his name. What should he choose? He liked his name, but it seemed dull. Why would he not choose a pseudonym if given a chance to? Maybe go for something funny. But no, what if he had to interact with others at some point? Then that would have been awkward. His eyes drew downward. There, beneath the monitor, a pair of a keyboard and a mouse lay. He began to type on the keyboard at a tortoise-like speed and left-clicked on the mouse, only later realizing he could just press enter. Meanwhile, he wondered why the little machine was called a mouse. Was it ground from the corpse of a literal mouse? It looked like mice, that's for sure. The user has been authenticated as Linak. The query vanished, replaced by a small loading circle that spun lazily in the middle of the screen. Minor glyphs appeared around the circle's perimeter every few moments, only to disappear before he could make sense of them. Loading. 23%. 45%. 77%. Not again. Kaniel prepared himself for another bout of torture. For fuck's sake, he practiced his English. But nothing happened. Only a ding-a-ling chime. 100%. The desktop emerged. 3 lone icons floated in the holographic light, all with a simple design. Just as Kaniel hovered the cursor over one of the 3 apps, a small pop-up followed by a bright flash of light in the lower right corner of the screen appeared, a miniature ghost-like human figure with an oversized crown on his head and a golden cape twice his size dragging behind him. His tiny hands rested on his hips in a heroic stance. A tiny, shadowy red figure, like a wisp. Only its eyes were of a different color, white in its entirety. The same as the symbol of a trident on its forehead. It stretched its hands. "Wellllllcomee," it screamed in a cutish voice, violently. The noise encapsulated the whole room. Kaniel's ears almost bled. They call me many names. The Conqueror. The Great Archmage. The one and only Emperor. Family and friends call me Constantine, it said with pride as it strutted inside the monitor from left to right and right to left in a jestful manner. They're all wrong. Wrong. The Emperor stopped and glanced at him with sad eyes. Kaniel was as cautious as he could ever get. He presumed the holograph he was witnessing was simply a will the Emperor had left behind. But who knew with these godlike figures? Even after their death. If the Emperor were to figure out somehow that Kaniel was a fraud, he'd undoubtedly grill his soul and toss it to the pits of the abyss. But, the figure of a miniature emperor hunched, its eyes sorrowful. I'm Richard. I was born and raised in a family of 3, went to a college at Cornell, and spent my latter years as a mathematician. My home is Earth. All my life in this new world I've been reincarnated into, I've tried my best to find a way back. But alas. The mini-emperor pressed its hands against the screen. I'm sure you understand me. I placed hints to this inheritance in the English alphabet all over the world in case there'd be someone from the future just like me, a poor soul from Earth tossed into this barbaric world. Kaniel gulped, sweating profusely. He felt as though the Emperor pierced his soul, with those empty white eyes of his, through the holographic screen. He had spent all his childhood in an attempt to decipher the bits of this weird English language. It smiled. Not that it had a mouth to do so, but it could be told from its eyes. The years of my research didn't go unrewarded. Months before my death, I made a breakthrough in dimensional magic. There is a way back. Ah, was that so? Kaniel wondered if any Earthlings were to be in his place, would they jump up and down in joy? He wasn't from Earth, so he couldn't sympathize. But that demands hard work and wit. You'll have to bear through numerous arduous challenges. If you've gotten this far, I'm sure you have some basic qualifications to attempt it. It slumped forward, folding its arms, while its eyes dim. So let me explain. It pointed toward the first icon of a dark tower veiled in dark flames, a tottering obsidian colossus. A place where you'll get to up your level from 0 to hero. Flame Tower. This is the inheritance ground. In this tower, there are 100 floors. You've probably played video games, so you can get the gist of it, it said with a tinge of nostalgia. Kaniel blinked blankly, confused. There are various monsters, traps, puzzles, and sometimes settlements on each floor, which, upon completion, you'll get shiny and tasty rewards. The requirements to climb these floors vary, sometimes meet a certain condition, find the gate, kill a boss monster, and on and on. Mind you, this is not a simulation, but a real place constructed by my genius self. You die there, you die for real. Game over. Make sure to beware of the mimics and even chickens. You never know. Its eyes widened mockingly, arms behind its head as it floated. In fact, you are currently on floor 0. This white room is a domain I built for you, and you'll appear here every 3 nights while in sleep. Kaniel leaned back and put the finger on his chin, trying to digest the information, yet the will gave him no chances as it continued talking, pointing toward the second icon of a mosaic gold coin. Dimensional store. That is where you spend your points to buy stuff like skills, runes, items, and such. Not complicated. What is getting points themselves. There are 2 ways. A. Through the tower. B. By transforming gold into points. The rates are 100 grams to a single point. Come again? Kaniel shot back in shock. Such an amount of gold was enough to buy a house, and here, it was traded for a single point. The will, of course, didn't mind Kaniel. It couldn't. This is wondrous, isn't it? It's too soon to get excited, my friend. It presented the last icon with fervor. The internet. With points, you can even use the internet. It has many functions. They will slowly unlock as you level up, but for now, all you get is Wikipedia. It raised its voice. I'd love for our meetings to be memorable, hence, I'll shower you with gifts. You've gotten this far, after all. You acquired a passive skill, Dreamscape, B. You acquired a domain, White Room, D. You acquired an active skill, Stow, D. A talisman, Planeswalker, B, has been added to your domain. Plus 10 points. Well, then, until the next time. Swinging its cape, it disappeared. Kaniel could understand none of the internet. He knew it was a global computer network providing various communication facilities, as seen in the user manual. But communicate with whom? His world didn't have an internet. Also, what was Wikipedia? He clicked on the third icon. One more blue box popped up. You acquired a unique class, Internet Explorer, A+. Finally, a worthy reward for all the hardships he'd gone through. Kaniel knew the ranks. Weakest was G, followed by F, E, D, C, B, A, and at last, S, as far as the manual inscribed in his mind told him. Despite having no idea what the class Internet Explorer was other than that it had something to do with the internet, the rank of A+ signified its importance. Moreover, it was a unique class, meaning he was the only person who could have it, making the class no second to a lesser S-rank one. Why? Despite the vast chasm between the ranks, especially the higher ones like S and A, Kaniel could tell the advantage of having abilities nobody had and could predict. Now, he had to make the best use of the class and adapt to it. He drummed his fingers against the table in deep thought. Status, he whispered. The transparent blue screen reappeared once again. Lineac. Class, Internet Explorer, A+. Level, 0. Points, 10. Skills, 3. Before focusing on the computer or the class, Kaniel inspected the skills he'd gotten from the Emperor's will. Skills, 3 out of 5. Active, 1. Passive, 1. Domain, 1. He first checked on the single active skill he had gotten. Stow, D. Cooldown, not applicable. Consumption, micro. Move objects from the specific dimension to the chosen domain and retrieve them whenever needed. When touching the object subjected to stowing, the object disappears instantly and reappears within the domain, where it will remain indefinitely until retrieved. Quite a helpful skill. With its help, Kaniel could now bring the objects from his world to the White Room. For example, gold could be transported to be converted into points. The lack of cooldown meant he could use it whenever for as many times as he wished. Micro-consumption indicated that the skill would require minimal energy. Though what kind of energy and whatnot, he wasn't sure. Dreamscape, B. Every third night, the user is automatically transported into their domain. Time moves differently, whereas where an hour has passed, only a minute elapses in reality. If the user sleeps near an unconscious person, they can enter their subconscious mind, allowing them to explore their dreams, memories, or mental projections. The user, however, cannot control their dreams directly, but only observe and tread through them. Quite a helpful skill. But Kaniel was starting to get concerned. His shoulders slumped forward, and his chin dipped to his chest. None of the skills were combat-related. What use was traveling into others' minds if he could do nothing to their bodies? How was he supposed to put them to sleep in the first place? At least he had no need to worry about consumption or the cooldown. Still a theory, but if every other passive skill was similar, then they were more valuable than the active ones. After all, they had no restrictions. He pressed his fingers to his temples in frustration. White room, D. A white room with high defensive and disguise properties. Is that all? Kaniel couldn't believe that the magical domain white room he was in was just a regular white room. No, on second thought, it made sense. Applying the talisman, Planeswalker, B. Once again, the system was pulling some shenanigans without his verdict. White room, C-. A white room with high defensive and disguise properties. Possesses a single-time ability to transfer ownership through a contract, binding two individuals. Kaniel ran a hand through his hair, furrowing his brows. The white room got from D to C rank with the talisman. It seemed to him that talismans worked with domains, just like charms did with artifacts, amplifying them. But, for him, this improvement, in particular, amounted to nothing. Share the ownership? Bring another person? What a joke. He was sure that no amount of persuasion would make him share this inheritance that he got through the thick of his skin. Now, he could only rely on his class for combat skills. He highly doubted that he could buy anything that would immensely boost his combat strength in the store with a mere 10 points. He exhaled deeply and prepared himself for the worst. And the worst happened. Internet Explorer. Attributes. Aspects. Afflictions. He had a terrible premonition, but proceeded nonetheless. First came attributes. Attributes. Essence 10%. Vitality 10%. Perception 10%. Creation 10%. Information swarmed into his head as Kaniel tightly clasped it with both hands. Essence, or, seemed to be the power through which the system operated. It came from one's very soul. Whether it was the usage of skills or even just having a look at the status screen, one needed vast reservoirs of essence in their soul to epitomize their usage of the system. Vitality encompassed stamina, endurance, recovery, and health altogether. Most physical capabilities, basically. Kaniel could imagine one with good vitality attribute would endure countless sleepless nights and fight for a prolonged time, or resist the deadliest of diseases, even. More and more ideas came with each passing second till he shifted his gaze to perception. Perception was just like how he'd imagined the sixth sense to be like. The only difference was, other than adding, it enhanced each and every pre-existing sense. Whether it's hearing, smell, vision, everything. How well to spot danger, analyze the surroundings, or even traits like intuition, accuracy, connecting with the habitat, and detecting hidden threats or objects like traps depended on one's perception. Creation signified his ability to shape, manipulate, or manifest both the tangible and intangible to their minutest details. It governed how well he could craft objects, control the complexity of the said objects, or reconstruct environments or tools. Alchemical experiments, enchantments, or assembling artifacts all relied on it. This was just like the real world. In his world, one could choose one of the four main paths to master. Mages who cast complex spells. aura masters who utilized their bodies, elementalists who contracted spirits and manifested the core elements. Lastly, crafters who specialized in alchemy, runes, formations, and alike, like Kaniel himself. Kaniel was an alchemist, a crafter. It was almost the same. Essence was an alternative for mana here. Vitality could be seen as aura. Perception granted a better connection with the world and oneself, better spirituality, just as the elementals back in his world. Finally, creation was a substitute for sigils through which the crafters weaved and brought to life their creations. The only lacking replacement was for the specialists. But those were a rare bunch to begin with. Suddenly, Kaniel was reminded of the star symbols beside his class. He shook his head to brush the idea off and switched to aspects. Aspects. Planeswalker. Corporation. Clubsuit subspace. Cerberus. Spadesuit deceit. One more painful surge of information protruded into his head. He rubbed his face with both hands, dragging them down to rub away the exhaustion. It became pretty clear to him. He was a specialist. Or, well, whatever the system's alternative of a specialist was. While symbolized essence, vitality, perception, creation, represented specialists. Internet Explorer was a specialist class. Aspects were just like skills, the only exception being that they could be grown, and, as of now, were nowhere near their maximum capability. The empty stars signified that he couldn't use 4 of the 5 aspects yet. For example, to unlock the Planeswalker aspect, he'd have to bring perception to 100%. Until then, he could only use Cerberus as he already met the requirements for both vitality and essence, which were none to begin with. Without further ado, he looked up Cerberus. Cerberus. Hound of Past, Ser, F. Summoned Ser, the firstborn Hound of Hell, who can mend minor wounds and undo cumulative damage, scars, or fatigue. Kaniel couldn't help but laugh hysterically as he pressed his hands against his eyes. All he could do with the oh-so-special Internet Explorer class was to summon a dog? How was he supposed to fight? To add more salt, he had to upgrade his vitality and essence to improve his aspect. It occurred to him that for the first floor, Kaniel would have to bring a huge bag of combat potions and hope for the best. Yet, he hadn't seen the worst yet. He reluctantly put attention on afflictions. Afflictions. Constancy. Sincerity. Pacifism. Gnosis. It looked ominous. No, it was ominous. Kaniel immediately understood. For every aspect he got a corresponding affliction, a curse of sorts. It was ordered from the minor to the most dangerous ones. Already fed up with anger, Kaniel decided to start with the lighter one. Constancy. The merchant perceives no universal value that can be attached to goods. What is significant may one day become insignificant. The merchant trusts in the goods they sell as they trust themselves and distrust that doesn't belong to them as they distrust all else but the absolute. Asterisk the merchant cannot receive tangible goods in dimensional trades. What do you mean? Kaniel screamed at the blue box before him. His patience, which lasted for so long, was shattered in crumbles. Doesn't that make the dimensional store useless? He whispered to himself. Also, why was he called a merchant? The class clearly was named Internet Explorer. He breathed deeply. In. Out. In. Out. In. If this is the best of worst, just what kind of thing do the other 4? Instead of pondering, he just directed his gaze toward the damned blue box once again. Sincerity. The merchant places their reputation on a pedestal, which is foremost built on trust and truth. They must perceive but neither deceive themselves nor the others. Asterisk the merchant cannot tell lies, withhold truths if questioned, or break any promises. This is preposterous. He stood and slammed the table, blood covering his knuckles. Without the power to fight, the only way he could survive thus far in the unforgiving world of nobles and ever-growing confrontations was by knowing what and when to say. His only saving grace was his eloquence. What kind of ridiculous setup was this? But there were 3 more. Pacifism. The merchant's words are the shapers of the future, the tellers of the past, and the cutting force of the present. They thus must sharpen their blade as much as they can. While the merchant carries the shiniest sword, they do not personally engage in any battle. The merchant cannot attack or gain experience by themselves. Kaniel was left speechless. He had no words to describe his miserable life. All these years, he had sacrificed all his prospects for the emperor's inheritance, became crippled, and now, everything he got was an ability to move things around, get a better night's sleep, and a damn dog. How was he supposed to fight in the inheritance ground if he wasn't even allowed to? How in the world could he level up and increase his attributes if he couldn't even gain the experience that those levels so required? But there was even more. Gnosis. 888,888,888,888,888. T8 he 88 me 8 chant 88 May 8th B8 GA 8 Z 8 D upon 8 B8 Y the demon sultan 888888. Kaniel fell headfirst and hit the tip of the table with his head. It hurt. Not the collision, no. The memories that resurfaced in his mind. So, the system meant to tell him that that glob of mass consisted of random matter he had seen, a literal god, was watching him? Now, the only worst thing that can happen is, I don't know, a literal god of destruction looking for me, haha, he laughed emptily. The demon lord of destruction always observes you. He could no longer laugh. He never believed in destiny. He knew he was not a good human being, but, such punishment, nobody in the entire world deserved it. Even the most heinous evil deities didn't deserve such divine retribution. Hard work doesn't guarantee success. The only guarantee is suffering. Thus those with high ambitions are cursed for eternal damnation and endless toil with no promise of relief. Kaniel had worked really, really hard. Yet the results yielded no miracles, only despair and agony. Such was life. Sacrifice yourself and everything you hold dear, and the glimmer of hope may remain as distant as it ever was. Kaniel gave a relaxed, tired smile at the screen before him. He had no motivation to click the mouse. Who cared about the internet, the weird tower, the store he couldn't even use? Who cared about everything, really? Something within him told him to push forth nevertheless. It always did. When he was beaten by his servants for being a crybaby. When he was battered at the academy for having no talents, unbefitting of his status. When he was berated by the whole world, his own family included. When the only good points he could make of himself were lies. Only one thing kept him pushing. Always, it always did. Such was the duality of life. Such was the greatest addiction humanity had ever beheld. Hope. For some, hope for a better day. For some, hope for a better future. At times, even, hope for a hope. Are you watching me right now? He spoke to the air. Demon Lord of Destruction? How bored can a deity be to watch after a lowlife? Are you having fun? Silence. You know how hard it was? I've spent all my younger years reading the fucked up exploits of the Emperor. I hated the guy with all my heart. All the help I had making out the English letters were some stupid hints gathered in dust in the forgotten corners of the libraries. He clasped his heart, shaking vehemently. He hoped he had at least gotten a skill to heal his weak heart. Fine. Be it. I'll continue the tirade and play this masquerade. Whether it's a trap or a curse. I hope you enjoy the show. Silence. 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 Complete and utter silence. Whiteness surrounded him from all sides. Emptiness. Nobody to talk to. Nobody to listen to. His eyes darkened. He could hear his weak heartbeats. Barely clinging to life. Barely pumping blood. Ha 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 ha. Kaniel slumped into the chair, one arm draped over the backrest. His other hand pressed against his face, fingers curling lazily over his mouth, muffling the remnants of a sneer. His hair fell in waves, tumbling over his eyes and shrouding shadows across his face. Beneath his murky gaze, amusement glinted. A sense of restrained chaos. Something darker, about to snap. Cruel, restless, unpredictable. His head tilted to the side, slightly. The corner of his mouth twitched. Blood wrapped around one hand, sloppily. Another meaningless wound. Madness hovered, masked by slouched shoulders, and a lazy grin. Seconds passed. Minutes. Blood dripped every now and then. Then hours. His mind calmed from the pandemonium he'd just experienced, from the relentless cycles of mental and physical torture to possibly becoming a puppet and a plaything. What remained was peace, tranquility, and pure madness. Kaniel shifted in his seat. One leg bent upward, the other sprawled lazily to the side, relaxed. His fingers brushed against his lips. The eyes shone darkly from beneath the wild mass of hair, scanning everything unseen with unsettling insanity. An arm rested against his knee, while his other hand hung loosely in dried blood. Finally, he held the mouse once again, and once again, he flicked the cursor toward the internet icon, the pale light of the screen reflecting off his glazed-over eyes of the darkest dark. Wikipedia. Email, unlocks at level 5. Kaniel felt a sticky trickle of blood run from his nose, warm as it slid past his upper lip. His expression was unmoved, apathetic. He flicked his tongue out and traced the trail of blood along the curve of his lip. It tasted metallic, disgusting. He ran his other hand across his jaw, half-heartedly wiping away the remnants. He clicked on Wikipedia. Wikipedia. Cost per use, 5 points. Access to Earth's Wikipedia database in its entirety. Provides articles that explain real-world subjects, whether history, science, philosophy, or trivia. With his 10 points, Kaniel could use Wikipedia only 2 times. He could access any chosen information from Earth. There were some other functions, like email, but they'd only open at higher levels. Kaniel had no idea as of yet how hard it'd be to reach level 5. For now, all he had was Wikipedia on the internet. He left and pressed on the icon of a golden coin, the dimensional store. Kaniel didn't have high hopes since he was restricted by his constancy affliction and wouldn't be able to purchase tangible goods. Unlocks at level 10. Turned out he couldn't even access the store until level 10. Lastly, the only thing left was the tower icon. Kaniel didn't risk it. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. What if he got transported to the inheritance ground upon clicking on it? He was restricted from fighting. He was also restricted from lying. Just how was he supposed to save himself? Fuck it, he said, clicking the mouse button. As if he hadn't already gambled all his life. Floor 1, Darklands. No sun has touched this land for as long as it has existed. The sky above is a perpetual expanse of blackness, pierced only by the occasional lights of stars, the dying embers of forgotten worlds. The deserted wasteland stretches endlessly, broken up by ruined villages, graveyards, and dead forests, where trees stand in solitude against the night. Swamps bubble with decay, their surfaces disturbed only by the ripple of bones moving beneath. Hint: moss-covered stones and ancient ruins are scattered across the landscape, remnants of a civilization long devoured by time and death. 71 hours 57 minutes and 44 seconds. Kaniel took his time to properly digest the contents of the first floor before the timer below ticked. 71 hours 57 minutes and 43 seconds. He was indeed inside a dream. A minute in reality equaled an hour in the outside world. Thus, a second here amounted to a minute. He waited another minute just to confirm. 71 hours 57 minutes and 42 seconds. After the confirmation, Kaniel got back to Wikipedia. It was time to spend his points. Initially, he had planned to hide in the north for as long as he could and develop his strength. Yet he could neither talk nor fight now. He was rendered useless by the system, entirely. One mistake, whether here or outside, would ordain his doom. His destruction. Kaniel tilted his head downward. His bangs fell across his eyes. A thin stream of blood continued to drip from his nose yet again. His expression was a void. He slowly planned and took into account every detail he possibly could. Undeniable truth he had no choice but to face. The taste of iron was as disgusting. There is a way. He looked at the computer. At how advanced it was. If Earth was so far advanced, then what if he didn't need strength to begin with? The thought was instantly rejected. How could he stand against indomitable forces with such prune methods? Then again, what was power? Throughout the ages, there were those who could shatter mountains with their fists and cast a storm of fire just as large. But that was strength, not necessarily power. Power came in many ways. Authority was one of them. Numbers. Information. Resources. Kaniel's entire demeanor shifted instantaneously. Everything shattered as a surge of thought crashed over him. His hand shot up, covering his mouth and nose. His eyes widened, pupils blown, darting from place to place. Every hair on his head stood wild, as though electrified. He tilted his head to the side, lips pressed tight behind his hand, fingers dragged down, parting just enough for his teeth to show, biting back words as he knew there was now a figure always watching him. His other hand trembled at his side, balled into a fist. Emperor Constantine was an eccentric. For one, he always empathized with mathematical formulas. He had changed the way people viewed magic. From an untamed beast that couldn't be controlled, magic was turned into a discipline like alchemy and runecraft. There were rules. A law inherent to everything. People operate their lives on those rules. Any breakthrough would turn the world in its entirety. Now, he had access to infinite knowledge from Earth. He could create his own new world within the North, a developed world, blending the knowledge of the two worlds. Cooperation was a key. He couldn't develop his own strength. Yet, he could build a force. Rule through other people. Become a puppeteer who dwells in shadows, unbeknownst to the world. This was the right way to conquer both the inheritance ground and the real world, a path to power. Exhausted, Kaniel was on the brink of losing consciousness. He had a feeling that if he slept, he'd leave the domain. In the real world, he'd have 3 days before he was thrust into the tower forcefully by the system. English. 6,903,513 articles. Before him stood a white screen with the icon of Wikipedia, a globe with many strange symbols out of which he could only recognize the English W. Below it stood a search bar. Search ______. He could only choose 2 out of close to 7 million articles. The question was, which ones? Internet? Computer? History? Magic? Alchemy? Civilization 6, 2016 video game. Kaniel intently watched the screen. He had no luxury for misses. At first, he had wondered about all kinds of things to search for, from such rudimentary things as tradition and culture to the fundamentals of building a computer to more creative ideas like medicine, governance systems, military strategies, and weapon craft. Civilization was one of them. He didn't know on what basis Earth functioned and thus couldn't exploit the otherworldly knowledge. Yet he was intent on taking a stab at what would yield him the best results. Emperor Constantine had mentioned that the inheritance ground, Flame Tower, was just like a video game. Perhaps knowing what a video game was the key. Hence, the words within parenthesis enticed him even more to go along with the choice. He'd learn both about the civilization and have a hint at what video games were. There were many similar choices nearby too. Civilization, stratified complex society. Civilization B, 2010 video game. Civilization 4, 2005 video game. Civilization, 1991 video game. Civilizations in Babylon 5. The variety made sense as it seemed impossible to fit all the information regarding civilization into a single article or even a book. Kaniel presumed that the numbers before video game signified years, and thus, the one from which he could most likely get the best information would be the 2016 version. Still, after pondering for a while, Kaniel deleted the letters. I got too greedy, he whispered. I have no leisure to experiment. There are only 2 shots I can take. Kaniel leaned back in his chair, the exhaustion dragging him down. His hand slid off as it fell to his side. He raked his fingers through his hair, tugging, questioning, and doubting. The first floor isn't the problem as I can share ownership of the domain and garner help, but the latter floors are worrisome. If 2 searches aren't enough to make an extensive research, he stretched his leg forward, the other pulling in, foot resting against the chair leg, his gaze lowered on the monitor in front of him, pupils lost in various scenarios. Then the first things first is ensuring enough points, isn't it? 100 grams of gold can be converted into a single point. It's settled then. I need to strike it rich. His lips pressed into a thin line. Narrowing down the range of words he'd search would avoid a shot at the dark. As he had no knowledge of Earth, it'd be great to pick a universal term. After writing random words on the search bar and looking for results, he came to the conclusion, either gold or money will do. He tilted his head upward, his neck strained enough to let his gaze drift toward the ceiling. What do you think, Demon Lord? Money or gold? Gold or money? With money, he would be able to buy gold. But searching for gold might let him obtain an easy way of attaining gold other than mining and runecraft. Usually, Kaniel would immediately opt for the safer one, which was money. Yet, from the moment he'd been pranked by the ridiculous inheritance, something within him broke. Gold, chemical element with atomic number 79, oh. Gold it is, he said, proceeding with a click. The article Gold has been downloaded to your devices. -5 points. A gargantuan article popped up on his screen. Kaniel first read it aloud. He then blinked emptily, staring at the screen. The fuck was that? He read it again and felt like his head would explode. Oceans, countries, atoms, isotopes, wars, artifacts, policies. At the third reread, he approached it slowly and tactfully. Gold is a chemical element, it is symbol O, from Latin aurum and atomic number 79. In its pure form, it is a bright, slightly orange-yellow, dense, soft, malleable, and ductile metal. Chemically, gold is a transition metal, a group 11 element, and one of the noble metals. It is one of the least reactive chemical elements, being the second lowest in the reactivity series. It is solid under standard conditions. Despite not understanding half the words, the first thing that got his attention was chemistry. It was, at the same time, overly similar and different from alchemy. As an alchemist himself, he got very curious about the subject. Only if he had enough points to research each word he didn't understand properly. He felt like a swordsman who stumbled upon the notebook of a senior alchemist. Most of the words he didn't understand glowed in blue, yet when Kaniel clicked on them, it demanded 5 points. After trying to make something out of the chemistry part and failing miserably at it no matter how many times he reread, Kaniel moved on. A relatively rare element, 11, gold is a precious metal that has been used for coinage, jewelry, and other works of art throughout recorded history. In the past, a gold standard was often implemented as a monetary policy. Gold coins ceased to be minted as a circulating currency in the 1930s, and the world gold standard was abandoned for a fiat currency system after the Nixon shock measures of 1971. This was no less interesting for Kaniel. Gold as a monetary currency? Ridiculous. Since the beginning of ages, people used lifestones as money. Lifestones were the common currency in the world. Those stones were the sole rank 0 or unranked runes of life. Hence the name, a lifestone. One of the most popular theories was that every other rune in existence was derived from them. For every different type of rune in nature, there was an estimated number of 100 lifestones. An average monthly earning in the capital was 30 lifestones per person, equating to a single lifestone per day. By absorbing those tiny, colorless pebbles, one could get nutrients and a healthy body. But this was the tip of the iceberg. Elementalists cultivated lifestones for a better connection with the spirits and longevity. Mages and warriors used it for prolonged training and study sessions as a basic energy supplement whenever they were too busy to eat. Crafters implemented lifestones in the creation of, well, everything, really. Kaniel couldn't imagine that gold possessed the same value. Although preemptively, he had read the article twice and still couldn't find a reason for it. There was only a single explanation for this phenomenon. Perhaps they didn't have lifestones, he whispered to himself. That would mean that Earth would function on completely different laws. He felt as though he was reading a fantasy. In 2020, the world's largest gold producer was China, followed by Russia and Australia. 12. As of 2020, a total of around 201,296 tons of gold exist above ground. 13. This is equal to a cube, with each side measuring roughly 21.7 meters, 71 feet. The world's consumption of new gold produced is about 50% in jewelry, 40% in investments, and 10% in industry. 14. Gold's high malleability, ductility, resistance to corrosion and most other chemical reactions, as well as conductivity of electricity, have led to its continued use in corrosion-resistant electrical connectors in all types of computerized devices, its chief industrial use. Gold is also used in infrared shielding, the production of colored glass, gold leafing, and tooth restoration. So, gold is used in computer production. It is also as rare there as it is here, he pondered aloud. Ironically, the computer was among half the words he understood in this section. He'd never felt so stupid in his life. There are many countries, though. Why would Earth be divided into countries when humans are the only intelligent beings? There are no dwarves, elves, goblins, or even those pesky dragons there, to my knowledge. Well, I bet there's at least no racial discrimination. Below was the section with characteristics. Only one segment extensively caught his attention since he couldn't understand most other parts. The possible production of gold from a more common element, such as lead, has long been a subject of human inquiry, and the ancient and medieval discipline of alchemy often focused on it. However, the transmutation of the chemical elements did not become possible until the understanding of nuclear physics in the 20th century. There is alchemy on Earth and yet no lifestones? It doesn't make sense. Kaniel exhaled in perplexion as he reclined on his chair. Alchemy was driven by life force. So it completely didn't make sense that there'd be alchemy without lifestones, the primary source of life force. Also, making gold out of lead? If anything, the Earthlings were truly ambitious. Any alchemist would laugh it off. Yet Kaniel was an optimist. Was. He remembered that he's now a pacifist. The damned afflictions. After the characteristics came the gold's role in the creation of Earth, a bit about asteroids, and a bit about the universe itself. Though of no help, Kaniel slowly formed an abstract image of Earth in his mind. Then came the history, origin, religion, and even culture sections. Kaniel was baffled that gold could play such a high role in history and even more astounded at the number of nationalities and religions listed. The history of Earth seemed very rich. Afterward, after scrutinizing the mining, extraction, refining, recycling, and even pollution sections and finding nothing noteworthy, Kaniel moved on to the crux of the article. Monetary use. He struck a jackpot. Kaniel could now learn about money without having bought the article. He slumped forward, leaning onto his knees. His hands dangled between his legs, fingertips pressing against each other as if trying to anchor himself. Shoulders drooped, his white shirt crumpling. Shadows drew over his weary, sunken eyes. Bills that mature into gold coin, and gold certificates, convertible into gold coin at the issuing bank, added to the circulating stock of gold standard money in most 19th-century industrial economies. In preparation for World War I, the warring nations moved to fractional gold standards, inflating their currencies to finance the war effort. The concept of golden coins already seemed stupid. But bills and certificates? Weren't those just papers? Kaniel couldn't comprehend it. Gold standards and the direct convertibility of currencies to gold have been abandoned by world governments, led in 1971 by the United States' refusal to redeem its dollars in gold. Fiat currency now fills most monetary roles. Switzerland was the last country to tie its currency to gold. This was ended by a referendum in 1999, 162. Things only got weirder. Fiat currency? Kaniel could make out none of it. More sections followed. Yet none could catch Kaniel's interest as much as the monetary use would. How can mere metal and paper control a world? Can't the banks of Earth just make infinite money? He felt stupid, as though he was missing something. In the rest of the article, the only catchy segment was the gold's use in medicine. If one got ill, they had to go to the priests and pray. Yet on Earth, it seemed, there were other methods to conquer diseases. Kaniel couldn't find an easy way to make gold. All in all, his gamble failed miserably. He got tons of useful information, yet none could be of immediate help. Despite being inclined to look up the money article, he still reread about gold several times. He now only had a single shot. Money, fiat currency, bills, certificates, There's a whole science behind it. Something clicked within his mind. He immediately returned to the search bar and typed a specific sequence of letters. A word he had no idea about yet had a hunch for. Economy, area of the production, distribution and trade, as well as consumption of goods and services. This is it. The article Economy has been downloaded to your devices. -5 points. I should have chosen economics instead of economy, Kaniel lamented. It is what it is. He only now understood that economics was most likely the science of the economy. What to make out of this? The economy article was short of information and instead filled with historical jargon. There were many new, exciting concepts such as supply and demand, market, wealth generation, resource management, and trade, as well as how production, distribution, and consumption shaped society. Yet none were delved deep into inside the article. Overall, the economy took many turns throughout the history of Earth, and in the 21st century was highly dependent on innovation, labor specialization, and global trade. He was fascinated by the concept of building a self-sustaining and productive society, yet couldn't quite find a way to put it into practice. No matter how many times I look at it, it never ceases to amaze me, he mumbled in awe at the image of New York City. Buildings were tall, very. The structures looked both the most organized and disorganized he'd ever seen a settlement be all the same. And here I thought computers were very valuable. He scrolled down to an image from the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. There were hundreds of them in a single room. Lastly, the image of the world map. Kaniel could finally make out what Earth looked like. As the economic principles, theories, and concepts swirled with the relentless flood of information in his mind, Kaniel raised both hands, pressing his fingers to his temples to ground himself. Fatigue washed over his face. The brows knit together in concentration and frustration, though more of a concentrated frustration. "I'm dead tired," he announced. He didn't doubt himself, rather, he questioned how he was even still awake and well. Well, in one piece, at the very least. That's under the assumption of everything he'd gone through. "This is a terrible idea," he said, yet he still stood and took the chair with his hand. He was planning to use it as a weapon if a need arose. But he quickly put it down, realizing he wasn't permitted to attack anyway. Kaniel had read the articles times and times, and thus had nothing more to do in this domain than simply sit and think. Yet, time flowed differently here, 60 times slower than in reality. The first trial at the tower was approaching. He had to get the best out of his time and optimize his chances as much as he possibly could. But his body wouldn't be able to resist the fatigue for much longer. So it only made sense to try out his new aspect, Cerberus, and summon Ser, the dog who could heal. Yet he hated dogs. Not just dogs, but every animal. It was mutual. Everything started when he was a kid and attacked by a highly trained horse. The misfortunes only followed. Every animal would unreasonably attack and try to murder him whenever they got a chance, from a sheep to a battle horse. Birds would oftentimes shit on his head when he strolled the capital streets. Even spirits, the kindest forms of life, despised his guts. Nobody, even the most skilled elementalists, could figure out why. Some called it a curse. Some called it karma for being such a disappointment. "I cannot attack, but does that mean I can't defend myself either?" he asked the air and found no answers. Mauled by a dog, a perfect way to die. Dying a dog's death to a dog. Kaniel found his predicament funny. Fitting. Animals submit to stronger ones to establish order within groups. Similarly, humans build social hierarchies. Kings and rulers exert power over nobles, who, in turn, hold authority over commoners. Intelligence, skill, and social status create an unspoken ladder, where the genius overshadows the merely talented and the talented the average. As such, most look for status and glamour, honor and glory, to establish themselves. Yet Kaniel was an oddball. He never accumulated wrath whether others stepped on him, spitted on him, scorned him. Though he always pretended otherwise, in his heart, he felt no humiliation for such. Nothing would change even if the roles were reversed. If the emperor himself were to kneel before him and kiss his toes, he wouldn't feel any pride or satisfaction. People would compare themselves to each other. They would laugh and mock the ones below, revel and envy the ones upper. Kaniel competed against himself only. He always strived to improve, to surpass himself. He didn't admire anyone. He didn't want to beat or be anyone. There would always be someone more intelligent, prosperous, and talented than him, and similarly, there'd be the ones at the lowest low, miserable. Those who thought highly of themselves were blind to higher heights. Those who thought low of themselves would lower themselves to their current predicaments. "Since I'm using my aspect, I can also deactivate it, can't I?" he asked. Hound of Past, Ser, F. Summon Ser, the firstborn hound of hell, who can mend minor wounds and undo cumulative damage, scars, or fatigue. He stared at the blue hologram for a while, his eyes unfocused, tired, aloof. Kaniel straightened his posture, one hand extended with a finger pointing upward as if declaring a powerful realization. "I give up." Surrendering to the dog, he let his body ease down the floor. He first leaned back, bracing himself with his hands behind him, fingers digging into the hair. Gradually, he let himself fall completely. His head tilted upward, his gaze losing focus as he stared blankly into the sky above, though he didn't truly see it. A sustainable economic foundation with lifestones, he whispered. Breeding healthy competition at the forgotten north while swarmed by the assault of monsters and the shortage of food. Seems like a fantasy, he smiled weakly. Can the north be brought back to its former glory? He raised his hands, glimpsing through the fingers. If only I can figure out how the banking system works. Lowering his hand, he brushed over his face to wipe away the invisible weight pressing down on him. His fingers lingered near his forehead before falling back to his side, limp and defeated. Kaniel stretched his legs out, letting them relax, while his chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each exhale heavier than the last. Say, if a child could buy a loaf of bread with a regular stone, dress themselves up, and loan a roof atop their heads, wouldn't they grow up with the high perception of a regular stone? If one could exchange a paper for 10 lifestones, then, in essence, wouldn't the paper amount to 10 lifestones? He spoke aloud to prevent himself from dozing off. Convincing people to accept currency without intrinsic value seems difficult. One would need an immense trust and reputation. As he lay there in a mess, a tremor ran through his hand. His eyes, though open, glazed over with the flood of questions racing through his mind. The ground felt cool against his back, grounding. Let's start by accepting deposits of lifestones with the promise of secure storage, offer loans from these deposits to trusted individuals with interest policy to show that depositors can earn interest, encouraging them to trust the bank with their assets. His body stayed relaxed, arms outstretched, and fingers splayed, releasing everything he'd held onto. Then issue promissory notes that signify the value of the deposits and gradually encourage businesses to accept these notes for transactions by proving their redeemable value. That's for starters. Seems easy in theory, yet. Kaniel closed his eyes, pondering. He had no more strength to talk. He lay there for hours, like a dog, thinking, and sinking. What exactly did I gain? What exactly did I lose? What exactly? His mind begged him to rest, and after several more hours, when he finally did, he heard wrenching noises. He's dead. Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. His body was being rocked back and forth. Gaia. Shut up, Kaniel implored. Argh. He's talking. My ears. Blinking himself awake, he focused, finding Zara, her face twisted beyond recognition. Stop, he begged. Please. Stop, the wounded man whispered through his charred lips. Please. Irina shoved the dangling, bloody organ into his mouth. Calm down, she mused. Now, chew down. Savor the taste. Then, I'll spare you. The evening lay heavy on the frosty forest and the bodies of fallen knights, their blood darkening the snow. All burned to crisps. Soft rustles of trees bent under the chilling breeze. Good job, she patted his head, smiling approvingly. Please don't complain. I'm just, you see. You've tried to fuck me to death, so I've come up with a fitting punishment. Where the gods are blind, I see, you see. Beneath an ancient ash tree, the commander, a gray-bearded veteran, lay, gasping his final breaths, his armor dented, drenched in blood and the mess he'd just thrown up. Will you, he whispered, spare me now? You didn't finish, she said, caressing his hair like a mother would do to their child. To kill or not to kill? Spare the dog, and he comes biting the very next day. Kill the dog, and the owner comes for revenge. Then, naturally, the right answer is to kill the dog, the owner, and the owner's wife. Before him stood a blonde priestess, grinning at him bewitchingly, the cloudy blue eyes filled with cold amusement. Suddenly, the agonizing cut in between his legs ceased. Cold. The night felt cold. I don't want to die, tears poured. Don't worry, she said as she stood, turning back and walking away in a particular direction. I'll spare you to the monsters. To live or to die, you decide your own fate. Kaniel rumpled his carefully folded attire. The trousers were of fine fabric, charcoal-colored, while the fabric itself was sturdy, comfortable, tailored close to his frame yet easy for movement, small silver buttons running along the sides of each leg. So, he said as he stepped into the trousers and adjusted the waistband. I made it clear not to disturb me, didn't I? Why would you barge into my room? Are you seriously asking that? Zara said in a high pitch, flustered, her back turned to the room, every line of her posture tense, straight as an arrow. There was no news from you for hours. Marissa sent me here to remind you of dinner and bring you a new set of clean clothes. Marissa? He asked. The head maid. All the important people are gathered. Priestess Vera, blacksmith Stanley, and even that fat guy looking after food and stuff, she said, her hands clasped before her, fingers fiddling as she stared down the wall. I knock on the door, nothing. I wait, nothing, only weird argug noises. I thought, ugh, you're doing that. Aggressively. That? She shifted from one foot to the other. A faint blush flushed her cheeks. Then you went silent. A minute, 2, 3, then I opened the door. Then. Bam. You're completely covered in blood. And burn. And naked. The bed is a complete mess, and the room smells like. It smells like shit, Kaniel finished for her. Once the trousers were on, next came the shirt, crisp white linen, smooth against his skin, cut generously yet tailored enough to hint at beneath, the collar high, sharp, with a fold that he fastened with a silver emblem shaped like a horse's head. The buttons of his long sleeves tightened at his wrists. Exactly. Wait. No. No. It's way worse than shit. It's indescribably shittier than shit. It's like you marinate a rotten fish inside a corpse with shit. Wait. That's not important right now. Her shoulders rose. What in the world happened? No. More importantly. How are you fine? I swear you didn't have a pulse when I checked. How was he supposed to answer that? Fairly simple. He had been through far worse, and he could always find a perfect excuse, no matter how ridiculous the situation initially appeared. He choked. The very moment the thought of deception crossed his mind, a sudden constriction sharpened in his throat as though invisible hands were tightening around it. The muscles in his neck tensed as a metallic taste seeped into his mouth to reject the lie before it could escape. Silence followed. You? Zara prompted him to continue. He coughed. He didn't even try to lie this time. Or did he? Well, it was a half-lie. Pain stabbed up his throat whenever he tried to force the words. The gnaw burned more with every second of resistance until he was forced to abandon the lie altogether. I have a weak heart. What did he just say? He didn't know. Why did he say it? He knew not. Why was it so hard to talk without lies? He knew no better. My heart rejects mana. It's a little challenging to live. Things sometimes happen. Bleedings, burnouts, physical and mental instabilities. A rare disease you probably haven't heard of before. The long 2-week-long journey had especially affected me in a bad way. Sorry you had to see it. I'd really appreciate it if you don't pry further. There it was. So what if he couldn't lie? He was a genius. Use partial truth and exaggerate to make it sound more dire than it is, appeal to their empathy by sharing something that seems vulnerable, create a smokescreen of complexity where the listener instead of digging deeper feels it's beyond their expertise and accepts the words at face value, create a sense of intimacy and trust to frame any further questions as invasive and disrespectful, and it would definitely. Still, Zara said. I'm dying from curiosity. What kind of disease is this? And how are you completely fine regardless of it? Not work. Kaniel nodded. He himself had almost died from curiosity a few hours ago. He could relate. What was wrong with the people in the north? Why did none of them have some bare minimum tact? Kaniel clenched his jaw to force himself into silence. He could feel the pressure building in his throat and coil around his vocal cords. First, a dull ache, then, an insistent sting. He pressed his lips to resist the urge to speak, hoping the sensation would fade, but it only worsened, searing up his throat like hot coals. His voice demanded release and finally cracked against his will. The single word eased the torment in his throat but triggered an exasperated sigh as he realized he couldn't evade this compulsion. I don't entirely know what it was myself. This kind of thing had never happened to me before. How am I fine? I don't know. Do you think I'm going to die? It's still weird. Why are you talking from your beautiful back? Are you ashamed to look at my face? Have you already fallen for me, Zara? He showered her in ridiculous questions as pompously as he could. You. Zara stomped her foot down and spun on her heel to face him, eyes blazing, her cheeks as red as cherries. Kaniel couldn't tell whether the red was of anger or embarrassment or both. Didn't you say I'm ugly, huh? Just how perverted can a man be to change their whole perspective based on that alone? She snapped in disgust, fuming. Apparently it was red anger. Huh? Kaniel had no idea what had just happened, but it seemed he had escaped the perilous situation. Perhaps he was indeed a genius. This last question, he could answer easily. What do you mean by ugly? You are beautiful, Zara, very. Your hair is like the night. Dark, yet somehow holding an elusive luster that teases at starlight and shadows at once. Each strand falls like silk woven from midnight, brushing against your delicate shoulders. It's the kind of hair you imagine poets write about, something mystical, meant to be tangled in desperate fingers. He draped a dark tunic over his shirt with hints of armor lining along the shoulders and forearms. Then he straightened, rolling his shoulders and adjusting his collar. Your eyes. Oh, those beautiful eyes. Those deep pools of molten amber hold secrets and storms beneath their calm, like a forest shaded but alive and vibrant with what words can never capture, and drawing you in to lose yourself without a trace. Do you also have problems with your head? Zara slowly stepped back, her face aghast. Kaniel began to walk toward her, making frantic gestures with his hands. Your skin, pale yet flush with warmth, reminds me of moonlight brushing across untouched snow. Porcelain and lively all the same, he mused, closing his eyes, falling into deep imagination. Your shoulders are delicate and proud like the crest of a hill under soft twilight that slopes into arms slender and strong under the layers of elegance benign. The door shut with an explosive force. Kaniel looked back. Finally, he was alone. System, he whispered. Yet no blue holograms appeared. Instead, a sudden thud broke the silence. He looked down, and there, beside his foot, lay a small, rectangular object. It was sleek, dark, and gleaming. A strange box. As his fingers brushed over its smooth surface, lines and symbols etched onto it. On a whim, he pressed one of them. It came to life. A bright screen reflected his face. The images and symbols on the screen shifted with every slight movement of his finger, revealing time and date, icons, and a small circle at the bottom. A phone, he realized. Recognition hit him. 4 apps were on it: status, flame tower, dimensional store, and the internet. Besides the additional function of looking at one's status, the smartphone worked like a computer. He heard footsteps from the corridor. Who would it be but Zara? Kaniel willed for the phone to disappear, and it did so. He greeted her with a warm smile as soon as she entered. Why leave if you return to me, my love? Shut up, she said, gritting her teeth. Just come. People are waiting. Kaniel followed her. Hopefully, the wet towels did their job and stirred away the smell. Otherwise, it'd have been awkward to go to the meeting smelling like death. Seated at the heavy oak table lit by glimmering candlelight were 4 key figures with the highest authority in Nashdome. The rascals making us busy people wait so long, the man muttered as he chewed at the meat. Gerbert, the head of the local adventurers guild, sat on the right side of the table. His reddish-brown hair and full, wild beard framed a face that bore the scars of battles and the fat that had accumulated since the day he'd left his active duty. Under the shining barrage of jewelry covering his body was a dark tunic with the guild's insignia embroidered over his heart, a treasure chest. To his left, there was Vera, the priestess, in humble and clean robes of light gray. Her bare head shone in the candlelight, her expression peaceful, her eyes detached from the world. Sitting with a statuesque poise, she clasped her hands in her lap, her posture upright. Patience, Gora said, seated to the left of the head seat. He stared at Gerbert, at the lavish chain of red gemstones on his neck, barely holding himself together. If he could simply dispose of the corrupt official without repercussions, he'd have long done so. I wonder what the youngster looks like, Gerbert said as he reached for another piece of meat. What's there to look for? They're all the same, Stanley, the man at Gora's left, voiced. The blacksmith's skin was bronzed from years at the forge, and his build was muscular due to the hard labor he had endured. The white hair on his head and the beard were messy, going right and left and up and down. He wore a durable tunic with a leather apron thrown over his chest, its many pockets filled with small tools and pieces of metal. This is such a waste of time. Indeed, Gerbert agreed. Time is of the essence. Time is money, a voice came from the other side of the hallway. You can't be more right. Steps followed. Thick silence. Their gazes shifted toward a young man, sizing him up. The torchlight draped shadows across his disheveled hair. Beside him stood a maid with a sly grin, guiding him to the feast. Gerbert rested his thick hands on the table as he eyed the man with scrutiny. His rugged face softened. Kaniel, too, looked at him. He smiled, at him, at his jewelry. So much gold. It'd probably hatch him a point or two. Still, even when Kaniel got to the table and sat in the head seat, nobody spoke. He waited, and waited, yet silence remained. Up until the priestess made a silent squelch and covered her nose. The truth dawned on him. He smelled like shit, didn't he? You said first impressions matter, Gora. Kaniel leaned back and eased himself into his seat. Do you like it? Before anybody could speak, he swung one foot onto the table, resting his boot on the edge like a hooligan. The other foot crossed over the first, his shoes muddy from the arduous journey. Do you like my smell, people? Silence befell. Even in the north, barely anyone could match or put up to his level of madness. Heavy wooden platters held thick slabs of smoked venison, the earthy aroma of herbs and garlic, an undertone of wild scent as rugged as the land from which it came. Well, it was. Now, nothing but the aroma of Kaniel pervaded the hallway. All food sat a small distance away from his boot beneath him. He drummed his fingers on the arm of his chair, looking smugly. Gerbert's fingers tightened around his goblet, knuckles turning white as he glared at the young man with fury. His ruddy cheeks flushed even deeper. Are you out of your damn mind, boy? He growled, his voice low, seething. Why do you soil our food with your filthy boots? Things are done differently wherever you came from, but here, we respect our food, our traditions, and the people who share a table with us. The grand oak table before was laden with a spread that pulled the harsh northern wilderness into every dish. Beside, a large clay bowl held a steaming stew of almost black under the flat candlelight. In it, turnips, parsnips, carrots, all dyed a crimson from northern berries. The rich broth flecked with herbs and spices, the forest itself, condensed into liquid form. Rye bread, crusty on the outside and dense within, was surrounded by slabs of salted butter. Gerbert's calloused hand slammed on the table, rattling everything except the feet on it. Don't you hear what I say? Pickled vegetables like cabbages, beets, and pale roots piled on a wooden board, bold, defiant against the muted tones of the bread and meat. Meat. Kaniel pushed the entire plate of it across the table with the sole of his boot. The platter scraped against the wood as it slid toward Gerbert. Fat dripped down its sides into the warm potatoes and roasted vegetables surrounding it. Sorry. It's probably hard to reach with your hands. Kaniel gave it one last nudge as it reached Gerbert. His eyes locked on the older man. Our food? Our traditions? You look like an Easterner to me. Nothing speaks north of you. Why do you pretend to be one if you're not? I say we're different from these barbarians. He sat further back, arms crossed behind his head. Kaniel moved his gaze around the table. He saw Gora watch him curiously. The muscular old man near him was enjoying the show, and opposite the blacksmith sat a bald woman, her eyes peaceful. The rumors regarding you weren't exaggerated. Are you completely out of your mind, kid? Gerbert spat words at him. Lower your feet this instant, Anne. A knife sliced through the air. It passed past Gerbert's face. The blade barely missed his cheek. His eyes widened. His head snapped toward Kaniel, ready to erupt like a volcano. Yet, he immediately stilled. What he saw was no longer a kid, no. Someone entirely different. The smug smirk had melted from Kaniel's face. Gerbert's breath hitched. A chill ran down his spine as he locked eyes with Kaniel. He felt the eyes, wide, sharp like twin daggers, watch through him, stripping him down to his bones, dissecting him. Pools of the darkest abyss, so black, so fathomless, they devoured any light that dared stray close. No softness, no humanity in those depths, only an impenetrable void. Pain. Ruin. Deeper and darker than any shadow, scarier than any monster he had ever faced in his 16 years roaming the continent as an adventurer. The gaze didn't waver. Ruthlessly. Nor did it blink. Relentlessly. Hungry darkness. It watched him. It pierced through him. It would swallow him whole without a trace. It knew exactly how it would do. It knew exactly how little it would care. For you, it's Lord. Lord Nashdome, said the Lord coldly. Shadows fell sharply across his face, dark hollows under his cheekbones. They barely contained whatever dark impulse lay within. His insolent smirk was now a grim line. Gerbert involuntarily bowed his head. His instincts told him this was the closest he'd gotten to death. Silence enveloped, not just him, but the whole room. The clatters and chick-chacks of the utensils halted. Even Gora held his breath momentarily. This wasn't a face that an arrogant noble kid would make. Ha, aha, ha. Kaniel's foot slid off the table as he doubled over, his body trembling with laughter. His shoulders shook uncontrollably. This is priceless. He chuckled. Ha 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 ha. Laughter. Raw, wild. Laughter, in waves. Each more manic than the last. Deranged cackle. His mouth opened in an unrestrained grin, baring teeth. His hair fell messily over his face, concealing his eyes, but not the gleaming smile that stretched like an unhinged mask. The veins in his neck stood. The laughter spilled out of him in fits. The voice cracked, wavering around the room. He slapped his hand on the table, tears pricking the corners of his eyes as he laughed. Laughs hit a higher, crazier pitch, close to hysteria. Agagagaga. Everyone else remained frozen, eyes on him as he laughed like he'd lost his mind. Kaniel's hand shook as he pointed at the food, clutching his stomach from laughing too hard. The maids that presided around the table all froze except the vampire, who, for the first time in a long while, felt keen interest. Lumen stared at Kaniel, her bloody eyes narrowing in curiosity. Look at it. He gasped between fits of laughter and threw his head back, mouth open in madness, the tips of his fangs visible in the corners of his broad smile. How efficient for someone with so few resources. It must be tough to work with what you've been given. There is no expectation that everyone will understand the value of helping the less fortunate, of course. It's a perspective not everyone has the heart to adopt, he proclaimed with amusement, gazing at Gerbert. Then, his eyes scanned the table, glancing at each person with a smile that looked friendly at first, but deeply unsettling the longer one looked, one by one. Splendid. He clapped his hands. How not one of you mentioned the smell? You're all aware of the rot and the decay around you. Yet you simply endure. Are you fine with this? Kaniel shot his eyes at Gora, pointing at Gerbert, who couldn't muster a single word. Such a touching notion. Cowards. Kaniel rose from his seat and strode toward Zara. He stopped behind her, his hands gently resting on her shoulders, fingers pressing down. So, they sent you, an innocent girl, unguarded, no supervision, no precautions, straight to my room? Haven't you heard the rumors? His gaze swept over the seated figures at the table. Zara stiffened, her breath catching. She kept her gaze forward, eyes teary. Kaniel's hands began to apply pressure to mimic a comforting gesture that hinted at something more possessive. His fingertips traced the curves of her shoulders. He laughed emptily. Say, and even if something were to happen to her. Some unfortunate accident. His voice dropped to a chilling whisper loud enough for everyone to hear. What would you all do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Kaniel leaned in closer, his voice a murmur against her ear, his breath warm against her skin. What do you think, Zara? They send someone so vulnerable and naive into a situation they have no control over. Finally, he let go and started circling the table. Again and again. His steps resounded. Inaction is a poison you all choose to swallow daily. That silence leaves the food piled high on this table, while people outside these walls scratch the dirt for scraps. Just how many people have died because none of you could be bothered to attempt to change? He finally sat at the head seat once again swinging one foot onto the table, the other foot crossed over the first. Kaniel leaned back in his chair. His voice dropped to a dark. Now, he said commandingly, get out. None moved. Get out, he barked, his voice snapping everyone from their paralysis. One by one, they rose from their seats as they filed out of the room, heads lowered. Maids slipped away with hurried steps and bowed heads. Their footsteps grew fainter until the room held stillness. Kaniel's gaze fell on Gora, who remained seated, unmoving, unreadable, his face impassive. Before you ask, Kaniel spoke before Gora could interrogate him. I need to take a bath. Gora stared at him for a long while. Then, he pointed toward the table. You should eat. Now that he thought about it, Kaniel was deathly hungry. All the talk built up his appetite further. The food looked delicious. It smelled good. Gerbert sank into deep contemplations. He walked to the corner of the room and threw his hand over to a dark wooden cabinet. His rugged fingers searched for a moment before pulling open the creaking door to reveal a neatly arranged collection of bottles. He picked one from the very bottom. Time flies. Don't you think? He uncorked the wine and poured a deep red liquid into a glass. As he settled into his cushion back at his seat, his gaze fell on the emptiness across the table. He took a sip, the wine bittersweet on his tongue, not enough to fill the void left by changing times and the absence of loved ones. Just like Kaniel, he was once young and ongoing. Yet the harshness of the world had stained him. Gerbert had been designated to the branch in the north and had decided to spend the rest of his days in safety. He didn't steal. Neither did he do charity. The Empire always paid him well, so he'd led a lavish lifestyle up till now. Who knows, in a few years, he might even get promoted to a bigger branch. Yet the resources they sent to the Nashdome itself were decreasing by each year. Gerbert suspected it might be due to the approaching death of the Emperor Vincent IX. The nobles were preparing for a war for the crown between the princes. The significant number of adventurers and traveling merchants coming to the area was cut. Most people in Nashdome had also moved to the warmer areas. Year by year, the population kept decreasing. There were not even 1,000 now. The room was quite quiet, deserted, the candlelight casting long shadows across the scarred wooden walls and tables. The scent of stale ale, burnt wood, and weapons persisted. His hands, rough from years of handling the said weapons and weathering the northern cold, trembled as he set the goblet back on the table, staring into its dark red depths, searching for answers. The way that kid had looked at him. The old Gerbert would have stormed out of the hall, dagger in hand, ready to carve out his pride in blood. But the fire was gone. He smiled self-deprecatingly. I'm just running, aren't I? Gerbert remembered his last voyage into the wasteland. Vividly. The comrades dying in pain. The spear hanging just a tad bit right to his heart. The reality dawning down on him. His elder brother Gerald getting torn apart by the tribe of bugbears. The shock. The fear. The rage. He was too young, too prideful. When he realized, it was late. Too late. Gerbert lowered his head, smiling weakly. Then he lowered his head. He was scared shitless. Pa ha 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 ha. The room of elderly, muscular, hard-boiled smiths, all grizzled from years of hammering iron, broke into laughter all across the table. One, a burly fellow with a silver-streaked beard, Tahir, wiped a tear from his eye, shaking. He clapped with all his might, like a marching band performer. What then? What happened next? Stanley gripped an empty tankard like a battle-worn weapon and slammed it onto the rough-hewn table. The firelight grazed off his bronzed skin as a grin cracked his face. The Lord said, he tried to mimic Kaniel's voice, for yeah, it's Lord, but broke into a fit of laughter amid his sentence. For you, it's Lord. Lord Nashdome. Bahawaha. Ahavaha chaba. As the story went on, the younger smiths gathered around the table, their brows raised, expressions caught between awe and skepticism. They leaned in closer. A skinny young apprentice couldn't contain himself and piped up, but didn't Lord Nashdome. Stanley catapulted an empty tankard at the lad, who barely ducked it, the tankard clanging against the wall. Go back to work, you morons. The youngster scampered off. The elderly smiths leaned in again, the fire crackling in the forge behind them, casting shadows across their weathered faces. What do you think, Stan? Tahir muttered, scratching his chin. What kind of person is the new lord? Lord Nashdome? Well, Stanley chuckled. It's either a disaster or a catastrophe. The Lord is a good person. The orphanage was a worn-down building on the outskirts of the town, its walls chipped, though diligently maintained, and smelled of old wood and fresh herbs from the nearby forest. Moonlight struggled through the clouded windows, casting dappled beams across the simple furnishings inside. Wooden benches, straw-stuffed mattresses, well-worn blankets that had seen many winters. With the Lord's help, Nashdon will prosper. Dara stood in the center of the room, her light gray robes flowing around her, dusted with patches of wear. A small crowd of scrawny children scurried around her, thin and wiry, their cheeks hollow, limbs delicate, some barefoot, others in patched-up shoes, their clothes oftentimes a size too big or too small, repaired with mismatched fabrics. They glanced up at Vera with curiosity. She held a soft smile, her hands resting on the heads of a few children nearby. A girl with hair like spun hay and eyes wide as a fawn's clutched the edge of her robe. A younger boy who missed 2 front teeth tugged her hand insistently. "Who cares about him?" a young voice piped up. "Tell us a story." Vera glanced at Panna and gently patted his head. She nodded as she knelt to meet his eyes, her bald head shining. "I'm sure the Lord didn't mean it. I will tell him to apologize before you." "I don't care," he screamed. "The story?" another girl voiced. "Yeah. Auntie Vera, you promised to tell us the hero story for today." Vera sighed tiredly, yet the smile didn't waver from her face. "Fine. I'll retell you the short version again." Children gathered close as she began to speak, her voice quiet. "Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, people lived in prosperity. Stars blessed every corner with warmth and eyed over tranquil nights. Children played freely in the meadows as their parents happily watched over them. Fields burgeoned with golden grains as laughter traversed the morning dew with the sweetest songs. But this age of serenity and peace did not last long. From the darkest depths of the forgotten abyss, from the deepest shadows of the netherworld, from the hearts of hell, the demon arose. Unlike any imperceptibly strong and cunning, his sole goal, to destroy the world. The overlord of all the demons. The unfallen one. The unbridled one. The one who beckoned destruction. The demon king. Darker than the starless nights. The king brought forth an era of terror that blackened the heart of the land and dyed its surface with unceasing rivers of blood. The army swept through the villages to demolish innumerable heritages and cultures. They left behind a trail of sundered destruction. Homes burned to cinders. Fields trampled and left barren. The world infringed with the cries and the perished sights of the innocent. What seemed was all was lost. When hope was at its lowest, on the verge of being begone. People on their knees, all giving up without trying to resist. The hero sparked their vain hearts. The flames he was brimming with lighted all the other torches. Together, they all stood against the demon king once again. They were no match. The hero lost. The demon king destroyed all who dared to relent. People were given 2 choices. Submit. Succumb. The hero refused to give up his light. After venturing through insurmountable challenges and fighting the king's lackeys, he stood against the demon king once again. The fight lasted long, seemingly unceasing. The demon king rampaged, ravaging an overwhelming number of people. No one stood a chance, and none could withstand the ferocity and evil. All but the hero. He alone stood, alone, he withstood. His ever-burning light was inextinguishable. As he lifted his sword, which carried the fire and the lives of his fallen comrades, he pierced the demon king. The demon king perished, and with him, all the evil was gone. All he left were empty promises of his return. The hero, weakened by the demon king, forever closed his eyes and lost his glister, lying on the mound of the corpses of his countless comrades. The hero too perished. The goddess of life exclaimed, "Oh, hero! Oh, hero! You have saved the people of this world. But how regretful, now that you are dead." The hero, though, was not sad in the least. He bowed to thank the goddess for all the powers she had bestowed upon him. "It is of no significance. My companions and I will always live in people's minds. Our heroic tales will be retold from one to the other forevermore. The memories will live forever and never perish. After all." And he continued thrusting his wooden spear, on, over and over, again and again. His steps were soundless, the footwork hardly noticeable. The calloused grip around the weapon was so tight that if one wanted to remove the spear from his grasp, they would have to pull apart his entire arm. Leonard sweated buckets, the droplets dripping down his hair onto his chest, where barely any spots were left scarless, and then onto the straps of his brown pants. His veins bulged through his refined muscles with every hitch, his posture as straight as the spear he held. He was moving at what first seemed like a random sequence, here and there, performing various maneuvers. He was expressionless, emotionless. Yet if one looked deeper into his eyes, there were layers upon layers. It wasn't as if the man moved without intent, no, every motion had an intention, direction, and clear and certain precision to it. Leonard continued lunging and striking and spinning and sweeping relentlessly. Finally, after what like forever, he paused, his chest rising and falling in steady but deep breaths. He let the wooden spear drop to the forest floor as it landed softly in the bed of fallen leaves. The scent of resin and frost hung around him. Tall trees rose, their trunks thick, branches weighed down by patches of snow. The wind bit him. Next, he reached for the blade lying beside him. A long, single-edged sword. As he took hold of the weapon, his grip shifted, more measured than with the spear. He held it in both hands, adjusting to the weight and balance, then moved into the first series of movements. Leo. You didn't forget to take a life stone, did you? For how long have you been training? A girl's voice rang out from a perch high up in the branches of an old ash tree. Are you that salty about what happened this morning? She teased, her shouts light and mocking. Some interesting rumors are going on. Wanna hear? Leonard kept his stance, not turning to look up. You should have rested for a few days after eating that kick, she continued, leaning down from her spot on the branch to peer at him. Vera sure does wonders. Why are you here, Linda? He asked, his voice low. Why, don't you enjoy the company? You look like you need a friend or two. She swung her legs playfully from the branch. I'm out of books to read. I've been reading the same stuff over and over and over again. She grinned, watching his knuckles turn white as he gripped the sword. He finally looked up, annoyed, to be met by her dark gray eyes staring at him with a look that was both irritatingly innocent and knowingly provocative. Her short, wild, black hair framed her face as if the tree itself had decided to crown her its impish queen. Cut the bullshit and get straight to the point. He shot her a glare. Linda leaned back against the tree trunk, her grin softening. Well? Leonard prompted her to speak. Can you teach me combat? Leonard snickered, about to get back to his practice. Then he halted, looking back at her. Wait, you aren't joking? Linda jumped off the tree. She brushed off the dirt from her jump and took a steadying breath. Conviction in her eyes, she said, teach me. Please. Leonard raised an eyebrow, folding his arms across his chest. What has gotten into you? Physical combat? As a woman? Are you out of your mind? Just as among men there were no elementalists, women could never surpass men in physical combat. Both could still become great mages and crafters. Humans were the most versatile in that aspect. Elves were mostly elementalists. Goblins were mainly warriors. Dwarves were predominantly crafters. Finally, dragons had an exceptional knack for magic. Yet humans could choose any of the four paths. This was both a blessing and a curse, as they didn't specialize in any of the four. Jack of all trades, master of none. For centuries, humans were looked at as disposable slaves by the other four races. The chains were broken by the first emperor, Constantine the Great. I'm dead serious. Just because I'm a girl doesn't mean I can't. Leonard sighed, shaking his head. That's not how the world works. Linda sked. 20 life stones. 40. 32. 50. The two glared at each other. 40 is the best I can do, she said. 60. Kaniel looked at the mountain of documents. Perhaps the relaxing bath he had taken was the last moment of peace he'd have in the following days. Just as you asked, my lord, Gora noted, standing to his left. The records for the past 10 years. A mess, Kaniel commented, scrolling through another pile of documents. I'm surprised the monsters haven't yet run over the place. Gora kept silent, slamming one more pile onto the rectangular table. Pitted from years of use, layers of yellowed parchment, each sheet crowded with dense black ink and written in a precise hand, covered it, crinkling as drafts slipped through the stone cracks. Some papers were curled at the edges. Others bore the faded remnants of seals that marked them as official imperial documents. A simple iron candelabrum rested in the center. It was moments like this that Kaniel would question his life decisions leading up to the very moment he was in. Heavy iron sconces lined the walls. Each held a candle, the wax of which had dripped down over time to form hardened rivulets along the metal. Overhead, the ceiling beams, thick and dark, supported the roof that groaned with the structure's weight. It felt like a prison. Those were not the best memories, though he doubted whether he had any to begin with. Kaniel read for a long while, his brows furrowing deeper as time went by. He first noted the drastic population drain. People were moving out. Among whoever was left, most regularly died in assaults during the unforgiving winter when food was scarce. There were descriptions of packs of beasts tearing through the farms closest to the wasteland's edge and new types of creatures emerging from it as if evolving to adapt to the barony's defenses. Requests for reinforcements had been sent to the Empire several times but had gone unanswered. So, they ignore the pleas for help, Kaniel pointed at the absurd numbers. Yet they demand a mandatory shipment of weapons crafted by the local smiths. We are bound by imperial decree to contribute arms, Gora stated the obvious. Swords, spears, shields, and armor pieces were catalogued, with each shipment accounted for. Failure to meet these quotas could result in fines or, worse, a retaliatory reduction in the resources they sent to Nashdome. This placed a severe strain on the barony's resources, as every weapon sent south was one fewer in the hands of the barony itself. Yet it remained inflexible, indifferent. Moreover, stores of iron, coal, and other smithing materials, many of which had to be imported from farther south at exorbitant costs, dwindled yearly. There are many mountains nearby. Why not just mine by ourselves? Have the idea never crossed your minds? Kaniel asked, tilting a chair on its back legs. The wasteland taints many of the nearest sites, Gora's voice came from left behind. Expeditions are dangerous and returns disappointingly low. Kaniel leaned back. What about the east? The wasteland covers the whole north, but there are still other areas, no? Although for a moment, Gora's brows creased slightly, his mouth turning down for a split second. What's wrong? Gora met his eyes. Years back, the Lord lost the eastern mountains in a wager against a county. Oh, Kaniel let out a chuckle barely more than a whisper, his shoulders quivering. Regret. You are very perceptive indeed and yet can't manage to hide your feelings. Gora remained silent, his gaze deepening, narrowing. Whatever, Kaniel said with both hands clasped before him, elbows on the table, chin resting on his knuckles, watching piercingly. I won't pry. I'm not inclined to care. It won't be of help anyway. The past is past. He glanced down at the documents and continued analyzing. The harsh northern climate limited what crops could be grown. Root vegetables like turnips and potatoes were staples. Hunters provided meat from the northern forests, however, the presence of monsters often made hunting a dangerous venture, resulting in scarce meat supplies. Trade routes to the barony were few and fraught with peril, and the traders themselves were increasingly reluctant to make the journey due to the monster threat and poor returns on their goods. Nashdome prided itself on the skill of its blacksmiths, carpenters, and hunters. The smithing industry wasn't just a matter of tribute. Some reports mentioned the potential for creating highly specialized weapons and armor explicitly crafted to withstand or counter the monster swarms. Innovations in weapon design and trapping methods were being developed locally, but resources limited large-scale production. According to the said reports, these unique designs could become valuable enough for trade or attracting external mercenaries. Wishful thinking, Kaniel scoffed. Why do you think so? The steward asked flatly. Gora, I want to clarify something here, Kaniel noted. Everything here is written by you, correct? Gora paused for a while, then nodded. Yes. Of course, the Lord said. You're a very smart man. Yet, what oftentimes seems plausible in theory fails miserably in practice. Could you elaborate? The steward gave him a sidelong glance. First, Kaniel raised a finger. You mentioned that resource shortages hinder mass production and yet hope for large-scale, specialized weapon production. Without stable access to essential raw materials such as iron, steel, and leather, the barony can't produce enough to attract trade or mercenaries. So, even if you come up with effective designs, the capacity to scale production is severely limited. He followed by raising another finger. Investing in experimental designs without guaranteed effectiveness is risky. The return on investment may not justify the high production costs. Unless the specialized weapons offer a drastic improvement, it's unlikely that other regions would pay a premium for these items. You put hopes in external interest that may never materialize. The third finger was lifted. That focus should be put on immediate survival rather than long-term development for now. As long as the barony remains vulnerable to attacks, progress will be disrupted. After Kaniel pointed out a few more arguments, silence permeated the room. Kaniel resumed his read, interpreting the calm as an agreement. The records included details on the burdens of taxation. Farmers, trappers, and artisans were expected to contribute a portion of their goods or income, though collection had become inconsistent as many residents could barely sustain themselves. The barony increasingly relied on compulsory labor like fortification repairs and patrol duties as a form of tax. They were obviously discontent regarding the whole situation. Several more notes were scribbled in the margins that suggested plans for longer-term survival and stability. Some hinted at experimental farming techniques or enchanted traps to protect crops from monsters. Others discussed incentives for people to settle, such as offering land and reduced taxes for those willing to brave the dangers. Bitterly cold winters made farming impossible for months. Preparations for winter occupied a substantial part of the barony's annual efforts. The records mentioned storage issues as proper preservation was crucial to avoid spoilage, leading to hunger and malnutrition among the populace. The barony had attempted to construct cold cellars and experiment with salting and smoking meat to extend food storage, but without consistent supplies, these efforts fell short. Some documents proposed using alchemical techniques to preserve food for more extended periods. Yet the resources and expertise were scarce. "You sure are creative, I'll give you that." Kaniel made sure to mock the annoying butler as he read. "But you can't just force people into doing what they don't like, even for their own sake. You want loyalty, not resentment." Kaniel immediately followed. "They'll give you the bare minimum. People have to see the value in what they're doing. Real strength doesn't come from fear or obligation, but from choosing to stand up for yourself and your own goals. Low morale spreads like rot. It infects everyone." "Are there any alternatives?" Gora asked, his voice low. "There are. There is also a reason why nobody has come up with it," Kaniel said with a slow smile, one that lacked warmth, only reaching his lips and leaving his eyes cold. People lose interest when they are forced into tasks they hate. They lose creativity and ambition. But when they're free to pursue things that align with their strengths and passions, they innovate. They push boundaries. Kaniel turned his head and pointed a finger at his servant. "If you're looking for growth, any kind of growth, whether economically, strategically, or culturally, you have to let them play to their strengths, not just assign them roles they can barely tolerate. A well-meaning tyrant is more resented than an honest monster because they claim to know better." "Economically?" Gora asked, puzzled. "Never mind that." Kaniel darted his gaze to the tall wooden cabinet, its doors warped. Inside were shelves stacked with leather-bound books, rolled-up scrolls, various quills, inkpots, a stash of parchment, and smaller stacks of sealed letters now covered with dust. Other chairs around the room were wooden stools and straight-backed seats intended for function rather than comfort, used by guests or locals who might attend a meeting. "Just go sit," Kaniel prompted. "Make yourself comfortable. We'll have to figure out together how to fix this mess." "I'm fine," Gora claimed. "I know you're testing me," Kaniel said, smiling, watching the man scornfully. "The point? Even if you kill me just like how you've set up the previous lord, a new pig will come. Nothing will change. This is an exercise in futility." He fixed his eyes on Gora. A smirk curled at the corner of his mouth, unsettlingly calm yet heavy. Sharp, penetrating. His eyes were subtle yet far more unnerving. "Did I hit the mark?" Kaniel asked, his voice ice cold. "Silence tells a lot more than you'd think." Gora held his gaze momentarily, his expression as inscrutable and unreadable as ever. He didn't flinch, didn't react. Without a word, he walked over to the chair at the lord's right, pulling it out. He lowered himself into the seat, hands folded in his lap. "You did your best." "I don't blame you," the lord said, turning his head back and reaching for another stack of documents. "The situation was simply beyond your capability. Yet you're a smart man, Gora. Instead of looking for lucky stars, you will adapt to what you have and work with it. Learn and grow." Kaniel leaned back after finishing another document. He let out a heavy sigh, contemplating and weighing the future possibilities. All had to be accounted for. Advantages. Population. Specialties. Resources. Prospects. Detriments. Undercurrents. Every variable mattered. Unimaginable it was. Kaniel was great at ruining everything, not repairing. The sole reason he had instigated his exile and had come to the north in the first place was to buy as much time as he could and gain strength. What worth was his previous act as an imbecile now that everything had gone south even though he was in the north? Life was such, ridiculous. Expect and you get the unexpected. Consider the unexpected and you get the expected. Regard both and you get the disregarded. That was why he should have disregarded everything to begin with. Only if he had the guts and wit to disconsider ifs, this situation would have never occurred. He shouldn't have stolen the damn inheritance. Yet no matter how long he lamented, it was no use crying over the spilled milk, especially if it was spoiled to top it off. The best he could do was enjoy the shitty taste of it. The table before him was an absolute mess, barely visible beneath the disordered piles of stacks of parchment, reports, and letters yellowed and curled from years of handling. His fingers felt stiff from gripping the pages, flipping through report after report that described the challenges facing the land. Thick ledgers filled with grain counts from the last 10 years scribbled in gradually worsening handwriting documented food shortages that also worsened each winter atop the failed attempts to grow crops in the freezing soil and the frustration of farmers who worked tirelessly to see their efforts wither under the northern frost. Maps lay between the stacks, the hand-drawn sketches of the surrounding territories marked with notes about monster lairs and potential hunting grounds. Vague attempts to make sense of the ever-changing wasteland. Wasteland. Those territories were owned by mindless beasts. People have tried over the centuries to conquer the wasteland, yet all the efforts were rendered futile and only backfired. Every piece of land beyond the borders of the Peiros continent, the Four Empires and the Holy Land, was considered as such. Anthropos, the human empire. Nereos, the elven empire. Nanos, the dwarven empire. Kobalos, the goblin empire. Finally, Bios, the Holy Land. A city at the very center of the continent, where all were welcome. Dragons, organizations, both religious and criminal, and the richest and strongest people, predominantly resided therein. The 5 places altogether made up the Peiros continent, the only habitable chunk of land in the world. Kaniel's initial plan was to finish the academy and move to Bios. Those were relatively shinier days, the days he had wanted to live in peace. Now, it was different. Peace was the last thing on his mind. I have it figured out, Kaniel said as he reached the last of the documents, an ache building in his temples, his eyes dry and tired. Let's begin with the monster problem. Just when he was about to start with the master plan, the door creaked open. Lumen, the vampire, a vision of chilling beauty, stepped inside. Her black hair flowed down her shoulders, streaked with a shade of crimson at the tips like the last remnants of blood trailing down from a blade. Her expression was as cold and detached as her dark, wine-red eyes that held no warmth. Deep and hollow, they fixated on Kaniel for a long while, accessibly. Her lips parted, barely. A barely there smile, more of a polite facade. Slightly different than the standard one before, she wore a dress of deep ebony with white lace against her pale skin, its sleeves flaring out at the wrists where lace ruffles trailed. A large purple bow was tied just under her collar. A silver tea tray balanced in her gloved hands. She approached the table and set it down. The porcelain teapot gleamed in the candlelight as she poured tea. Then, she took her place across the table to the lord's left, seated opposite Gora, folding her hands in her lap, her posture straight yet relaxed, her gaze shifting from Kaniel to settle into a steady stare forward. Is this okay? Kaniel pointed to the demon to his left. Lumen nodded. I wasn't asking you, he said, turning to the supposed steward. Why is she here? She'll be your personal servant. Your valet. I was planning to appoint Zara, yet you two didn't get along. Gora locked eyes with him. You can trust her as you trust me, he said. To Kaniel, that meant he couldn't trust her under any circumstances. Though, on second thought, did it really matter? Be it a god, a human, or a fly, everything could kill him with ease. More importantly, their goals aligned. Both Kaniel and Gora wished the best for Nashdome. Even the greatest enemies would cooperate for a common goal. What about you? Kaniel asked the pseudo-butler. I have too many tasks at hand, Gora stated. Ah, the Lord muttered, smiling at Lumen, fine by me. I'm looking forward to knowing you, Lumen. Lumen simply stared at him, expressionless. Kaniel leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence punctuated only by the crackle of the candles and the distant winds outside the stone walls settle around him. First, the plans for the winter. He opened his eyes and muttered, "We'll lure the adventurers to do the job for us." That won't work, Gora interrupted. Most of the adventurers are prideful and cowardly. They demand a huge prize for a half-assed job. Kaniel held the teacup with a slight tilt and took a small sip. Broaden your horizons. He lifted a finger. By funneling adventurers, we minimize the need to sacrifice our population to defend the borders. We'll use the adventurers as a line of disposable fighters who face the worst monsters so the locals don't have to. His gaze flicked from his drink to the people around him and back to the cup. The tea steam curled up around his face over his narrowed eyes. Adventurers are often driven by ambition and desperation. We will make Nashdome seem like a chance that cannot be missed. Many will come, blinded by the promise of wealth, status, or glory, not realizing they're entering a trap. A trap? The steward raised his brows. Why, obviously, the Lord whiffed. The corners of his lips pulled back into a mad grin. He leaned forward, one hand curled under his chin, fingers tapping. The creases around his eyes deepened the manic gleam in his gaze. We kill them. We eliminate most adventurers after their usefulness has expired to avoid the payment. We'll craft a feedback loop where these success stories keep the legend alive, attracting new adventurers and maintaining a facade of prosperity. These adventurers essentially draw more recruits to replace those who didn't make it. Gora gave a sharp look to gauge the Lord. But won't that eventually raise suspicions? If enough adventurers disappear and the word of it is spread, it'll tarnish our reputation. Not just adventurers, but traders and allies will avoid us entirely. It's no easy task indeed, Kaniel replied. He held the cup aloft, theatrically, a nobleman delivering a speech. His fingers tapped on the porcelain as he let each word roll off his tongue thoughtfully. The adventurers will be welcomed with feasts and promises of recognition. While they work on the front lines, we will control the information flow to ensure the foreigners believe they are part of a noble cause. He took another sip, giving a slow nod. Those who ask too many questions or express doubts will be isolated and assigned to more dangerous missions. Similarly, after adventurers have contributed to stabilizing the region, we will arrange for most of them to face missions with low survival odds. He pointed a finger at his steward. As for the concern with rumors, a few hand-picked adventurers convinced of the barony's legitimacy will be spared to spread curated stories back to their guilds and hometowns, with high rewards, of course, ensuring the cycle continues. You mean to bribe them? Gora asked, brushing his chin with his fingers. While they do the fighting, Nashdome can quietly redirect its focus to rebuilding, strengthening the walls, improving trade, and investing in sustainable food and weapon production. Exactly, Kaniel affirmed, the corner of his mouth quirking into a knowing smirk. What do you think? He turned his head and looked at the vampire. She remained silent and just nodded. This time, though, it wasn't by her own will. Lumen was left speechless. There was no way, whether in hell or here on the surface, such a thing would be legal. Never mind the legal part. Wasn't it just pure evil? But this was nothing in comparison to what followed. Yet what we want aren't their lives. We want their everything. Their weapons, money, and even their families, the Lord said. Lumen needed out of the room. She knew that she wouldn't be able to unhear what was about to come. A unique idea of mine. Let me introduce you two to banking. And so the avid discussions between the Lord and his steward followed. Lumen didn't follow. She was simply disgusted, to say the least, by the world, herself, the Lord, and humanity in general. As the time went by, sweat flowed down her chin. Her lips tightened, pressing into a line, the furrow between her brows deepening as she fought to maintain her calm. Kaniel reminded her of her father. Yet even her father wasn't as despicable. Gora leaned back with his sharp eyes, never leaving Kaniel. He spoke with a low voice, occasionally tilting his head, fingers beating against the table, probing curiously. The Lord maintained his confidence, leaning forward at times with a provocative smirk and at others back with his arms crossed. This is brilliant, Gora whispered at the end of the discussion, squinting his eyes still. However, we lack the resources to kickstart the project. How is this any different from the designs I've come up with? This idea of yours demands immense investment. You contradict yourself. No, the Lord exclaimed, pointing a finger at Gora, watching him piercingly. You are poor. I am not, he followed, pointing at himself. I can get enough resources to buy every single property in this barony. Both pairs of eyes, Gora's scrutinizing stare and Lumen's observant crimson gaze, turned toward Kaniel with sudden surprise. Those two didn't account for the difference between I can get and I have. How long would it take to establish communication with the local church in Reinhardt? The Lord asked. 5 days at minimum, the steward responded. It can't be helped. Kaniel stood up, leaving. Go notify the priestess to begin the process. Lumen followed from behind.